Chapter 14. You know what the best store is? I said, turning away from the progenitor monolith and toward the rubbery blue dog waiting patiently behind me. Wait, give me a minute. I know this one, Croc replied as though there was a right answer. Is it a water park? I bet it's a water park. What? No, I said, shaking my head. It was a rhetorical question and, for the record, the answer is definitely not a water park. That's not even a store. I paused, eyes narrowed. Though I'm genuinely curious about why that, of all things, was your go-to answer. Croc snorted and rolled his googly eyes. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Water parks are the best because they have so many slides. Me? I'm a big fan of slides. I used the one at the Burger Barn Play Palace and it changed my life. They are just great, slides. Going down them. Climbing the stairs back to the top, the anticipation building with every step you take. I mean, I've never actually been to a water park myself, but I bet water slides are 1,000 times better than what they have at Burger Barn. Plus, on top of the slides, they have wave pools. Can you imagine? A pool that makes its own waves. Like a man-made ocean. The mimic shimmered and transformed into a rubbery blue inner tube with oversized googly eyes. This is my wave pool for him, it said as a large gaping mouth split the side of the inner tube. It was horrifying. Nightmare-inducing. Yeah, no, I said, shaking my head. I mean water parks are okay, I suppose. Wait, does that mean you've personally been to a water park? Croc asked, shifting back into its dog form. Its googly eyes fixated on me in a mixture of awe and adoration. Like in real life? I feel like most people have been to a water park at some point, I replied. Not me, Croc said, head dropping in abject misery. Then the mimic dog perked right back up. Can you tell me what a real-life water park is like? Please? Croc's tail wagged frantically. Every detail, I wouldn't want to miss anything. Did they have food? How long were the lines? What was the highest slide you went on? We're getting off track here, I said, waving away the dog's onslaught of questions. The answer to my original question is Walgreens. Croc frowned, his muzzle drooping. Not sure I've ever been to a Walgreens. Based on their name alone, I assume they sell a variety of green walls, though I can't imagine how that would be better than a water park. No, they don't sell green walls, I muttered, pinching the bridge of my nose in irritation. It's a convenience store, back where I'm from. But like a big one. Thing is, no one ever thinks much about Walgreens. They aren't fancy or glamorous. Hell, the stuff they carry is the most basic, generic shit in the world. No one ever goes out of their way to visit Walgreens. But they're everywhere, they are always open, and they have a little bit of everything. Walgreens is the modern-day equivalent of an Old West general store. They have food and beverages, car parts and beauty supplies. There's a pharmacy in every location and an entire aisle of random, miscellaneous seasonal bullshit. It has more options than a gas station but is cheaper and smaller than a Target or a Walmart. It's the ideal trading hub where a weary traveler can get anything they need. In short, it's the perfect fucking store. Water was dribbling down from Croc's googly eyes. The dog was openly crying. It sounds like a truly magical place, the mimic said breathlessly. Still not as good as a water park, but a land of plenty all the same. Oh, it is, Croc, I said, nodding enthusiastically. It is. I should like to see such a place of abundance and whimsy one day. You're gonna see one sooner rather than later, I replied, because that's where we're headed. Why? Croc asked. I mean, it sounds lovely, but why the sudden interest in finding one of these Walgreens? Usually, new delvers want to find a way out, which there isn't, or get to one of the safe harbors, which is dangerous but possible. In all the years I've been working with new delvers, I've never had one asked to go to a Walgreens. I almost told the mimic that we needed to go there so I could plant the seed of a trading empire and undermine a malevolent deity who wanted me dead, then reluctantly decided against it. I would need to tell Croc about the compass and my plans eventually, but now wasn't the time. I trusted the dog. Mostly. But the compass was powerful, and depending on Croc's feelings about the flayed monarch, I could end up fighting for my life. That or Croc might abandon me on the spot, and I couldn't afford that. Better to play my cards close to the vest for the time being. We'll go to a safe harbor, but there are some very specific supplies that I need first, I lied, and I'm sure that if we can find the backrooms version of a Walgreens, I'll be able to get what I'm looking for. What sort of supplies? Croc asked, nosy as ever. I racked my brain trying to think of an answer. I hadn't anticipated so many questions. They have a bunch of stuff, I finally blurted out, but the thing that I need is a specific type of medication. Croc grew serious. Are you sick, Dan? Please tell me you're not sick. I'm really starting to like you and I wouldn't be able to forgive myself for at least 3 weeks if you died. It's not life-threatening, I assured the mimic, already regretting my deception. Croc nodded sagely, then added, is it hemorrhoids? I bet it's hemorrhoids. What? No, it's not hemorrhoids, I shot back. How do you even know what hemorrhoids are? I had a delver, about 10 delvers back, named Daryl. He went on and on about how bad his hemorrhoids were. Me, I've never had hemorrhoids, on account of the fact that I don't technically have an anus, but Daryl made them sound exceedingly unpleasant. Both hemorrhoids and anuses, that is. In a rather dark and ironic twist of fate, Daryl was later eaten by the ravenous Zant sphincter who dwells in the desert playground on floor 7. I scowled at the dog. I sincerely wish you hadn't told me any of that. Also, for the record, it's not hemorrhoids. Now, if you're done prying needlessly into my private medical affairs, can we please get going? Also, I added before the dog could answer, if you agree to not ask any more follow-up questions and help me find what I'm looking for, I'll tell you everything I know about water parks. Croc stared at me with equal parts wonder and joy burning in its eyes. This, the mimic finally said, is the single best day of my life. 1. I have a new friend. 2. That friend still has all of their body parts and doesn't have hemorrhoids. And, 3. That friend has been to a water park and is going to tell me about it. Dreams really do come true. Croc began to pace in slow circles. But finding this mystical dream store of yours could prove to be a challenge, it said. Still, there's never been a challenge I've failed at. Except for all of the times I've accidentally let delvers die. This is different, though. I can feel it. Admittedly, I've never heard of Walgreens, but that's not unusual. The backrooms rarely replicates things exactly the way they are in the real world. It consumes lost matter, which is then pulled into the uppers. Uppers? I asked with a raised eyebrow. The influx processing and randomization system, Croc said absent-mindedly. Please try to keep up, Dan, I really want to hear about those water parks. Now, after the physical matter is sorted into the uppers, the God box mashes it all together and generates new sections based on the divine algorithm, which is a process that no one quite understands. Except maybe the researcher. He probably knows how it all. Croc froze, mid-step. Wait. That's the answer. The researcher. You should have seen an option on the monolith keypad to access the research department job board. Yeah, I said, nodding along. I saw it. How does that help us? Simple, Croc said. The job board generates a list of all locations on any given level that have been corrupted by the blight. If left unchecked, the blight spreads like, well, peanut butter maybe? I don't know. But something that spreads quickly. The plague? I offered. Yes, just like that. Croc exclaimed. The blight is basically a plague. Or an infection, I suppose. The researcher is the big boss and he's in charge of keeping the progenitor vessel alive, but he's the only researcher left, so he can't handle everything on his own. Which is why he generates the job board and then offers rewards to any delver willing to purge one of the blighted locations. The more dangerous the location, the better the loot. Thing is, the researcher always leaves basic notes about the target, including its quadrant and sector location. I bet you could use the job board to find a store that fits your description. I grunted, impressed. For as dopey as Croc looked, The mimic was chock full of surprisingly good ideas and useful information. I wanted to hear more about the researcher and how he fit into the bigger picture, but that was a distant concern. Right now, the mission priority was finding safety, shelter, and a way to survive for the next few days and weeks. I sauntered back over to the monolith and fired it up once more, quickly scanning my palm, then using the keypad to toggle over to the menu section labeled Research Department Job Board. I selected the option, and it immediately conjured an enormous list of blight-infected stores, each with a star rating. There were hundreds of them. VHS Vault, Totally Rad Toys, Price Pro Plus, Far Out Fashion, Mythic Mementos, Nourish and Go, The Paw Palace. I used the arrow on the number pad to scroll down, then randomly clicked on one of the store names. The familiar burnt yellow pop-up appeared above the monolith. Big Savers R US. Threat Assessment Rating. Current Relative Position, March 28, 2017. 37-54, Floor 3, Quadrant 28, Sector 17, Relative Sector Coordinates 37-54. Big Savers R US is like every generic big box retail store you've ever been to. It's got cheaply manufactured home electronics, shitty furniture built from particle board that you are 100% going to have to assemble yourself, and all the other dubious household essentials that no one needs, but everyone seems to have. There's an entire section of just panini makers. Big Savers R US offers deeply discounted prices, which are sustained by a perpetual going out of business sale, fictitious pricing models, and the bloodthirsty sales team is overseen by the blight-infected bargain beast. With razor-sharp claws and a borderline sexual desire for savings, the bargain beast will make sure shoppers pay an arm and a leg for encroaching on its territory. Reward: 500 experience points, 5x copper delver loot token, 1x silver mercenary loot token. Accept job posting? Yes, no. I hit no, but I couldn't stop the grin from spreading across my face. This was exactly what I needed. I closed the description and turned my attention back to the job board list, scrolling faster and faster until I found another store that sounded promising. Mediocre Mart. Threat Assessment Rating. Current Relative Position, March 28, 2017. 64-13, Floor 3, Quadrant 28, Sector 17. You've been inside this place 1,000 times, but never actually by choice. Usually, you're begrudgingly driven there against your will by one minor emergency or another. Your kid is sick, but it's 10:48 p.m. on Christmas Eve, so where the fuck else are you going to go? They have food. Is it good food? No. It's stale bread, frozen Hot Pockets, and leathery beef jerky, but you'll eat it, and you'll like it. You can pick up diapers here or motor oil or a pair of, as seen on TV, copper-lined compression socks that will do wonders for your terrible circulation. It's all garbage, but you can't help yourself. You will buy it. And, of course, there's the pharmacy. It's only open for 4.5 minutes every other Tuesday, but that's on you for choosing to shop here. You could go to so many other places, but no. This is where you have your prescription sent, you rube. And there, hunched behind the service counter, is the blight-infested pharmacist. Clad in a tattered lab coat and wielding dirty syringes, the pharmacist revels in corrupting the flesh and providing drugs that fall outside of your insurance coverage. Reward: 1,250 experience points, 5x copper delver loot token, 2x silver delver loot token, 1x gold mercenary loot token. Accept job posting? Yes, no. Jackpot. Chapter 15. If Mediocre Mart wasn't the backrooms version of Walgreens, I'd eat a flip-flop. Sure, the description didn't make it sound great, but under the right management, it could be a gold mine. I accepted the job posting and turned back toward Croc. Found it, I said. Mediocre Mart. It's in Quadrant 28, Sector 17. The job board listed as a 2-star threat. Croc brightened. Quadrant 28? That's not bad at all. We're in an adjacent quadrant, so getting there should only take a few hours. Then the mimic's face sagged. The 2-star rating isn't quite so good, though. That means whatever is guarding the location is level 10 or above. I'm not saying it's an impossible bounty, but at your current level 1 I'm saying there is a 99% chance that you'll die horrifically and at least a 12% chance that something will tear your arms off and beat you to death with them. Wait, there's a 12% chance that something is going to tear my arms off and beat me to death with them? I asked slowly. That can't be accurate. I mean, that is just so specific. Well, let me think a moment, Croc replied. There was Joel, then Amber. The Stonebreaker baboon got Christian before that. Then there was Hosanna, I think she fell into one of the limb ripper snares. Brock and Rebecca had all their limbs ripped off by the gravity inversion room, though I guess technically they weren't beaten with them afterward. The Koopa and Kraken made short work of Ishmael. I held a hand up to stop the flow of increasingly gruesome deaths. Yeah, I think I get the picture. What I'm hearing is that I need to level up before we tackle Mediocre Mart. That would certainly help, but you'll also need some better gear and artifacts, I reckon. That acid attack you have is pretty effective. Bleach Bolt, I corrected without giving it any thought. Bleach was basic and acids were, well, acidic. Right, Bleach Bolt, Croc amended, but your artifacts are just as important to long-term survival. Since you've survived this long, I'm assuming you've unlocked a few research achievements and earned at least a handful of loot tokens, am I right? I nodded. Good, that'll help. But we'll need to locate a loot arcade to redeem them, and finding one of those could be tricky without a rudimentary navigation relic. The mimic paused as though considering something. Finally, it bobbed its head. I reckon it'll be worth the attempt, though. Getting some decent gear will drastically increase your life expectancy. And these arcades are where we go to redeem loot tokens? Got it in one, Croc said. And the arcades are great, Dan. Lots of cool games. Nifty vending machines. Loot dispensers galore. You just feed your tokens into the dispensers and out pop amazing prizes. It's so much fun. Usually, it added as a whisper. Unless there are dwellers inside, but usually there aren't. 8 out of 10 times, they are clean. Are you shitting me? I said excitedly. That's great news. I've got enough loot tokens to choke a horse. That's not how you use loot tokens, Dan, Croc said gently before I could continue. Didn't you listen to me? You put them in these loot dispensers. Croc shook its head. There are no horses involved, silly goose. I waved away Croc's comment. Forget about the horses, it was just a figure of speech. The point is I have a lot of tokens. Most of them are copper, but I've got a handful of silver and gold ones, too. Plus a few others that have different colors. I racked my brain, trying to remember all the tokens I'd earned so far. I think there was a ruby one. The other one might have been diamond. They were both gemstone colors, I'm pretty sure. Croc let out a strangled gasp. How in the world did you get your hands on those? Croc sounded in awe of my accomplishment. Loot tokens aren't relics and aren't ranked the same way, but if they were, those would be rare or maybe even fabled quality. You must have done something extremely impressive or extremely stupid to earn those. An image flashed through my head. Me standing, bathrobe fluttering behind me, as I used the slammer of shielding to save the gunslinger before chucking my hammer at the head of the eldritch horror who ruled the 999th floor. I pursed my lips. Honestly, it was a little bit of both. I paused. It does make me wonder, though, if this researcher guy can just directly drop these tokens into our storage system, why not give us prizes directly? That seems like it would make way more sense, instead of forcing delvers to dick around with these loot arcades. That's a fair point, Croc replied. It would be easier that way, no doubt, but the loot token system gives delvers more choices in what kind of prizes they receive. Tokens can be used to redeem all sorts of different things. Each individual delver knows what they need better than the researcher does, so this gives them a chance to pick the best reward based on their current circumstances. The type and grade of each token determines what kind of reward you'll get. Copper Delver tokens are the most common, and you can usually redeem them for things like food or water or basic survival gear. Nothing magical, though. No artifacts. But silver and gold tokens on the other hand. You could wind up with some decent gear. As for the gemstone grade tokens, I can't even imagine what those will earn you. Getting relics from the loot arcade is almost unheard of, but a ruby or a diamond token might do the trick. At the very least, you'll walk away with some high-quality artifact sigils to upgrade your weapons or armor. I don't have armor, I replied flatly. Just this fugly-ass bathrobe, denim jorts, a dirty undershirt, and clunky work boots without laces. None of that qualifies as high-speed, low-drag tactical body armor in my book. Croc offered me a toothy grin in return. But those items are armor here, Dan. All of the stuff Uniclipton with has artifact status by default, because those items have material significance, which means they are real. From the real world. Like you. That's what makes an item an artifact. Things that are pro-generated aren't real enough to be imbued with mana, but anything from your world that survives the transition becomes an artifact. Even more importantly, the items you arrived with also have personal significance, because you're the original owner. Why would that matter? I asked. I don't know, Dan. It's not like I make the rules. But items with personal significance are always the best because they'll have additional effect slots, and they'll scale with you. The more powerful you become, the more powerful they'll become, and as they advance, they'll unlock more and more effect slots. It's a great big circular loop of winning. And you can put all kinds of stuff into those slots. Elemental resistances. Added stat bonuses. Increased armor rating. Croc stole a sidelong look at me. Believe it or not, but I once saw a string bikini that offered as much protection as a full suit of medieval plate mail. Offered great movement bonuses too. Not that it saved Eva in the end. She was vaporized by a microwave cannon. I pressed my eyes shut and rubbed the bridge of my nose. I felt a tension headache forming behind my forehead. Ignoring the microwave cannon, are you telling me that the nut-hugging Daisy Dukes and the dirty undershirt I woke up in are going to be the best artifacts I have access to? Croc shrugged. Probably. I guess you could get better stuff later on, but any artifact with personal significance will always have one additional effect slot, and those slots could be the difference between life and death. You might look a little bit goofy, but looking goofy never killed anyone. Croc puffed its chest out proudly. I'm living proof of that. I groaned inwardly and took a second to inspect my stupid fucking Versace bathrobe. Imitation Versace bathrobe. Common artifact. Type, cloth armor, personal significance. You look terrible in this thing, and you should actively feel bad for wearing this. The hideous clash of reds and golds is jarring, and instead of expensive, Italian imported silk, this thing is made from the same cheap terry cloth material they use for hotel washcloths. And not nice hotels. The kind of hotel you pay for by the month. This thing is one step above a burlap bag. I would feel bad for you if this wasn't so hilarious. Effect slot, empty. Effect slot, empty. Great. Perfect. Awesome. I was going to be stuck with this stupid thing forever. Fine, I begrudgingly muttered. Let's find an arcade and go spend some of these tokens. Getting there could still be a problem, Dan, Croc said. Every quadrant has an arcade, which means there are 36 of them per level, but the quadrants are huge. By the time we find one, there could be a floor shift, and if that happens, getting to this Walgreens of yours could be next to impossible. I'm not sure I follow, I said. Croc offered a long-suffering sigh. I worry about you, Dan. How you made it to level 3 without even knowing about floor shifts is a complete mystery. The dog shook its head in disbelief. Each level has 36 quadrants, each with 25 sectors. When a floor shift occurs, all the quadrants rotate, though the sectors within each quadrant remain the same. Right now, Mediocre Mart is currently in quadrant 28. We're in quadrant 27. Those numbers are close together. But if a floor shift occurs, we could end up separated by hundreds of miles. I'm sorry, did you say hundreds of miles? I gasped. Just how big are these quadrants? Croc shrugged. It's not exact and it varies by floor, but here on floor 3, each sector is about 1 square mile, which makes the entire floor 900 square miles, I finished, after doing a little quick and dirty math in my head. I knew this place was big, but that was almost twice the size of LA, and that was just 1 floor. The sheer scale of it was mind-blowing. Precisely. Easy, I said with a shrug. We'll just head over to quadrant 28 and look for an arcade there, that way if there's a floor shift, we'll still be in the right general location. And don't worry about finding the place, I said, forestalling the mimic before it could interject. You mentioned something about a basic navigation relic. Turns out I have one of those. I flashed the compass at the dog, the brass glinting in the neon mall lights. I thought you said that was a flamethrower artifact, Croc replied disapprovingly. I lied. I pressed the compass of the catacomber against my chest and slipped it into my spatial core with a slight shove. Friends aren't supposed to lie to each other, Dan, Croc admonished, but I barely heard the words over the burst of intense pain suddenly rampaging through my body. When I'd added the other relics to my core, a gentle warmth had radiated outward to my limbs. This time, a raging wildfire roared in the center of my chest, sending pulses of all-consuming flame sprinting through my veins. Simultaneously, excruciating pressure built inside my skull as the power and the knowledge contained within the compass rewired my brain in the span of an eye blink. Research achievement unlocked. Legend in the making. You crazy son of a bitch. A mythic emblem? At level 5? You've got to be shitting me. Either you're the luckiest bastard alive or someone hates you, hard to say which. In a truly absurd twist of fate, you've somehow stumbled upon an outrageously broken ability that you clearly aren't supposed to have. Seriously. This is like giving a bazooka to a toddler. It's super dumb, but it'll probably be entertaining. Before you're done, legends will be spun about your reckless audacity and your devil-may-care attitude toward wielding forces of nature better left to the walking deities of the 999th floor. That, or you'll be dead inside a week. There's a reason fresh meat don't end up with this kind of power, and that's because something nasty is bound to come looking for it. A mythic emblem is reward enough, but there's a good chance you're a dead man working, so I'll throw you a bone. Title, Legend in the Making, increases the chance of finding rare relics and artifacts by 2.5%. As I read over the message, a fresh knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The research achievement confirmed the worst of my suspicions and fears, but I wasn't too deep to turn back now. I'd already been marked for death, so this was one of those sink or swim situations, and I planned to doggy paddle for all I was worth. When I dismissed the achievement, I found that the whole world looked different thanks to the power of the emblem now embedded in my soul. It was subtly brighter in some places, and darker in others. A nearby glass door that led into a jewelry shop burned with a faint red aura, which I instinctively understood meant it was trapped. Further on, a wrought iron bench pulsed with a thin thread of purple life essence. The bench was a flytrap mimic, just like the fake progenitor monolith that had tried to eat me outside of Eastside City Savings and Loan. That had to be my spelunker's sixth sense at work. Best of all, hovering in the corner of my vision was a semi-transparent digital map that showed me every twist, turn, shop, and hallway within a 50-foot radius. I focused on the map and found I could zoom in or zoom out, revealing more or less of the map at will. Huge swaths were shrouded in an opaque gray, but anywhere I'd already visited was lit up in white like Christmas lights. Turned out, mapmaker's eye worked retroactively. If I enlarged the map too much, the fine details faded and vanished, but when I zoomed in, they reappeared in crisp clarity. At closer range, I could see a pair of small triangular marks on the screen, which represented me and Croc. I frowned and glanced between the map and the wrought iron bench, which I was sure was a mimic. The creature wasn't marked at all. "Hey Croc," I said absent-mindedly. "Let's say, for the sake of argument, that my navigation ability gives me a map which is supposed to show the presence of any delvers or dwellers in the immediate vicinity. Is there a reason why something might not appear on the map?" I paused, staring daggers at the bench. "Say, a mimic maybe. That is an incredibly specific scenario, Croc replied, but theoretically, if you did have such an ability, there are a number of other abilities that might counteract the map's identification properties. There are several cloaking spells that could easily do the trick, and mimics won't show up at all if they are actively camouflaged. It's part of our core skill set. Good to know, I muttered, keeping one eye on the bench glowing with purple light. I fixed the nearest loot arcade in my mind's eye, then raised one hand and triggered one of my other shiny new abilities, Pathfinder's Unerring Arrow. My mana gauge plunged precipitously, and a ghostly blue arrow, visible only to me, blazed to life, shooting away from my chest and down the hall, swerving widely to avoid the mimic bench, then continuing straight for 100 feet, before taking a hard right and disappearing into a store called Style for Less, which looked like a knockoff JCPenney. Interestingly, a smaller version of the blue arrow also appeared on the mini-map in the corner of my vision, allowing me to see more of the arrow's path than I could in real life. Together, the two abilities synergized to form a supernatural version of Google Maps. The only bad part was that the path's illumination would only last for 30 seconds before fading, and because the spell had such a steep price tag, I wouldn't be able to cast it for another 10 minutes or more. I took off at a sprint, legs eating up the ground as I followed the ethereal blue light of the spell. "Come on," I called back over one shoulder. "The quicker we get to the arcade, the quicker we get to the Walgreens." Which is important because of your urgent medical condition, which definitely isn't hemorrhoids. Croc yelled back. "Something like that," I muttered under my breath. Chapter 16. The compass of the catacomber turned out to be exactly as awesome as I'd anticipated. Hell, it was probably even better than I'd thought on first inspection. The map was incredibly detailed, and it showed the location of every single dweller, allowing us to easily avoid the fiercest pockets of resistance and obvious ambushes. It used colored symbols instead of proper labels, so it was impossible to tell what kind of creatures we'd be facing or what their respective levels were, but it still gave us a huge edge. There were also the mimics to consider. We skirted by no fewer than 5 of the sneaky sons of bitches, which were disguised as objects that ranged from mannequins to drinking fountains. They didn't show up on the map at all, but thanks to Spelunker's sixth sense, I spotted them long before we ever got close to any danger. They were all juvenile monomorphic flight rat mimics, just like the fake monolith outside the lobby stairwell, and since I'd leveled up my mana so much, taking them out at range with a couple of bleach bolts was easy work. I earned 100 experience points for killing each one, which pushed me up to level 6, plus they all carried a common relic that replicated the effects of the basic combo kit I already had in my spatial core. The relics didn't all look the same, though. One took the form of an invisible ink pen, another resembled a hideaway money belt, while a third was just a fist-sized smoke bomb. But each made the user slightly less noticeable. Like the tinfoil hats, I couldn't add any of them to my spatial core, without first swapping out the combo kit. Aside from killing the mimics and earning some easy experience, I took the liberty to loot pretty much everything that wasn't bolted down, tossing all of it into my subspace storage system. I raided the back-to-school section first, pilfering backpacks by the dozen, before moving on to the shoe department. I shamelessly stole boots, running shoes, and flip-flops, then hit up the men's clothing department, grabbing heavy-duty Wrangler blue jeans, thick iron guard work jackets, and enough t-shirts to keep me in fresh clothes for a month. Not that I'd be likely to use them, I considered bleakly. None of them were artifacts, they were just clothes, which meant no effect slots and no stat bonus. But the t-shirts would make excellent pressure dressings for wounds, and I could always sell everything else to customers once I got my shop up and running. I also took the opportunity to fit my Red Wing work boots with a new pair of shoelaces so they wouldn't threaten to fly off every time I broke into a run. We followed an erring arrow through the Style for Less, finding surprisingly little resistance, and out through a hidden door tucked away inside the fitting rooms, which connected to a secondary utility corridor that shaved off hours worth of travel time. Our next stop was a tiny storefront called Extreme Supplements, which loosely resembled a GNC. That one wasn't quite so easy to clear. Although the shop was small, almost claustrophobically so, it was filled with a handful of extremely disgruntled level 3 roid gremlins, who were impossible to avoid, despite our best efforts. The gremlins were short and stocky, each standing no more than 3 feet tall, with large bat wing ears and huge mouths filled with jagged black teeth. They wore tiny red speedos, which showcased their painfully swollen muscles, and were slathered in so much bronzer and tanning oil, they left treacherously slippery puddles in their wake. Angry, swollen zits as bright red as their speedos carpeted swollen lots and bulging delts. 1. The apparent leader of the weightlifting tribe, who was the only level 4, wielded a bench press barbell like a bowstaff and wore workout gloves with large iron spikes jutting from the knuckles. The gremlins weren't especially fast, but they were strong and, even more importantly, they were irrationally pissed at everything and everyone. It was hard to blame them, considering how bad their botany was. That would have made me pissy and self-conscious, too. How long are you gonna be on the squat rack? One shrieked before charging toward me with an inarticulate bellow of rage. Don't bogart the free weights, bro. Another snarled, swinging a heavy flail, which was built from a weighted jump rope with a kettlebell attached to the end. The whole interaction was extremely confusing, especially since we were in a supplement store filled with shelves of pills, bottles of pre-workout, and huge plastic tubs of protein powder, but absolutely no weights. There wasn't a squat rack or dumbbells anywhere in sight. Not that the roid gremlins gave two shits about that. As a former Marine, I'd worked with some world-class crayon-eating morons, but these jackholes made those guys look like bona fide rocket scientists. Them or not, after squaring off against the level 3 janitorial handyman in the lobby, I was genuinely nervous to go toe-to-toe against the Viney Dude Bros. Turned out, however, my fears were misplaced. Although I hadn't gotten physically stronger while leveling up, my bleach bolt was devastatingly effective, which made sense considering the gremlins were only a flimsy red thong away from being completely naked. The concentrated bleach ate through bronzed skin and bulky muscles like a ravenous pack of piranha. I also discovered another perk, courtesy of the compass of the catacomber. The researcher's codex not only granted me additional information about the individual dwellers, it also projected their health and mana bars during active combat events. Which meant I could see exactly how much damage my attacks were doing, and how much magic each individual dweller had at their disposal. The gremlins had no magical ability whatsoever and needed to be in punching range to do any kind of damage. Thankfully, they were slow as balls, so keeping them at a distance wasn't all that hard. And when one of the irrationally angry gremlins did manage to get close enough to be a threat, I took the opportunity to cast psychedelic light show of minor distraction. A pair of illusionary blacklight dragons exploded from my hands, draining the rest of my mana, but they ended up being well worth the expense. The glittering creatures flitted gracefully between the supplement shelves, looping, swirling, and dancing together as they spit brilliant bursts of neon sparks from their jaws. After 2 steps the encroaching gremlin went utterly still, staring up at the light display in slack-jawed wonderment like a kid seeing fireworks for the first time. It almost made me feel bad when I slipped around an end cap stacked with bottles of Power Pro Muscle Mind Extreme Pump pre-workout, unleashed gains that defy sanity, and drove my hammer into the back of the gremlin's skull with a sickly wet crunch. I gagged on reflex as a combination of hot oil and warm blood sprayed across my face and ran down my neck. Maybe someday I'd get used to how absolutely disgusting this place was. Today was not that day. The hammer blow would have killed anyone else, but the jack gremlin just stood there, swaying on thick legs, eyes still fixed on the blacklight dragons. I brought the hammer screaming down twice more, once into the side of his head, then again into the base of his spine. Finally, the gremlin's beefy legs gave out and he crumpled to the floor. The brief pause had let my mana recover just enough to launch another bleach bolt, but I didn't need to. The rest of the gremlins were dead, thanks to Croc, who was now covered in a truly obscene amount of gore. I'd only caught a brief glimpse of the mimic fight, but it had been enough to make me eternally grateful that it was helping me and not hunting me. Croc's head had split open revealing an immense circular maw, lined with teeth. A small army of writhing, flexing tentacles had exploded from the mimic's spike-lined gullet, ripping apart one of the gremlins, then consuming another one whole. Croc was made out of, well, croc material, which meant it was hollow and dotted with holes, so I had no idea where in the name of sweet baby Jesus the gremlin had disappeared to. I didn't ever want to find out. Croc and I had killed 5 gremlins between the two of us, and I ended up with a total of 675 total experience, while Croc wound up with 425. How exactly those points were divvied out was hard to say, but on top of that, the gremlins ended up being a gold mine of greasy, disgusting treasure. I earned a new research achievement, Mindfucker, for successfully utilizing the psychedelic light show of minor distraction in battle, and my first 2 uncommon shards. Each of the gremlins also carried a bright red jockstrap that looked vile and smelled like taint cheese and rancid feet. Honestly, I considered burning the whole lot of them on general principle until I examined their stats. The gremlin's groin guardian. Common relic, level 1. Passive ability. Look, we can give this thing whatever fancy name we want, but we all know this is a magical nut bucket, plain and simple. Is it dignified? No, absolutely not. But neither is getting kicked in the dick, so pick your poison. The Roy gremlins who commonly wear these things are basically naked because their ridiculous muscles serve as armor. But some areas need a little extra protection no matter how strong you are. The gremlin's groin guardian grants an additional 10% resistance against all physical attacks and an enormous 95% resistance against physical attacks aimed at the old long dong silver. But this armored banana hammock also comes with a bad case of magical jukich. You receive 10% additional damage from all magical or elemental sources of damage. Better get that looked at. The idea of having a dirty gremlin jockstrap tucked away inside my soul was a revolting notion, but the passive benefit was too good to ignore. I added it to my core even though it made me feel dirty on the inside. The level 4 gremlin had a second common relic, which was even better than the gag-inducing jockstrap. The relic, called the Force Multiplier, resembled a pair of sweat-encrusted workout gloves with iron spikes protruding from the knuckles, and unlike the enchanted jockstrap, there was no downside. When activated, Force Multiplier allowed me to deal an additional 10% damage on a single strike, while using any item that qualified as a blunt weapon. Even better, it consumed stamina to activate instead of mana, and though the price tag was a little steep, 10 stamina per use, it meant I had a wider range of options to draw on. It made perfect sense that the Roy gremlin would have a skill like that, considering he used a blunt barbell to crush the skulls of his enemies, but it worked great for me, since my claw hammer was still my go-to melee weapon. The barbell in question also turned out to be a common artifact. It didn't have any specific magical power like my slammer of shielding, but it did have a single empty effect slot. I tossed it into storage along with the makeshift jump rope flail and the rest of the stained jockstrap relics. Even though I was jonesing to get to the arcade, I took a little extra time to pick over everything that Extreme Supplements had to offer. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten, sometime during the hazy, booze-fueled bachelor party, but that had been more than a day ago. Most of the stuff crammed onto the shelves was just a single step above nonsensical garbage, but I did manage to turn up a bunch of whey protein powder, an accompanying box full of shaker bottles, and disgusting off-brand health bars called Protein Power Pucks. They tasted like dirt slathered in peanut butter. But they were also 300 calories apiece and packed in 30 grams of protein. Truth be told, I'd eaten far worse during my time in the Corps. The protein pucks were heaven on earth compared to the veggie omelette bar, and they were 1,000 times better than slowly starving to death. I scarfed down 2 and added another 3 dozen to my storage space. The other big find actually turned out to be the tiny plastic bottles of Power Pro Muscle Mind Extreme Pump pre-workout. I never would have even considered looking at the end cap, but it glowed with a hazy yellow aura. The aura was so subtle at first that I almost thought it was a trick of the light. Upon closer inspection, I realized all of the pre-workout bottles were actually one-time use drink elixirs. Power Pro Muscle Mind Extreme Pump pre-workout, Greater Rage Elixir. Uncommon Elixir. Type, one-time use. Tap into the primal fury within to unleash gains that defy sanity. As your muscles swell, a homicidal rage grabs you by the goddamn throat, giving you superhuman strength, titanic stamina, and the raw damage output of a guy on bath salts loitering in front of a Waffle House at 3 a.m. Although your gains will be legendary, the line between friend and enemy might blur just a little. Hallucinations are common, and you may find yourself seeing your fellow gym-goers as the ultimate challenge to be eradicated. Will you leave a trail of devastation in your wake? Yes. Obviously. The real question is, who the fuck cares? It's all about them gains. After reading the description, I resolved to never, ever use the pre-workout drinks from hell, but I also couldn't justifiably leave them behind. They were all uncommon elixirs, and someone out there would pay top dollar for them, even if it wasn't going to be me. Into the storage they went. Prizes in hand, Croc and I left extreme supplements behind, slipping through another concealed employees-only door and back out into the mall proper. I conjured an erring arrow once again and watched as the trail of glimmering blue light shot away, then curved slightly and disappeared into a neon-lit wonderland. We'd finally made it to the Loot Arcade. Chapter 17. Like everything else on Level 3, thematically the arcade looked like it had been ripped straight out of an episode of Stranger Things. Neon blazed, painting the walls in a tapestry of eye-searing purples, bubblegum pinks, and loud electric blues. The carpet was a deep navy and dotted with cheesy cartoon planets and distant starbursts. Rows and rows and rows of arcade games twinkled like digital constellations beneath the garish and disorienting lights, all issuing beeps and bloops. For once, I recognized several of the machines. There were older games like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, Galaga, and the OG Street Fighter right alongside a bunch of systems I'd never seen before, which was saying something. I'd spent a good chunk of my young adult life tucked away inside of arcades not so different from this one, and I'd sure as shit never heard of Pixel Pizza Party or Jungle Jumper Joe. In addition to the arcade cabinets, there were a half-dozen skee-ball machines, several first-person shooters, claw machines, and a small fleet of racing games, all called Nitro Derby Dash. I thought you said we were looking for vending machines? I asked Croc, making sure not to cross the threshold into the colorful arcade. You didn't mention anything about an actual video game arcade. Why else would it be called an arcade if there wasn't an actual arcade? Croc replied. That would be a sloppy and confusing naming convention, wouldn't it? I grunted and waved my hand toward the machines. Could be I'm wrong, but those don't look like they give out loot. Yeah, those aren't loot dispensers, but you can still win prizes, Croc said. Most of the arcade games take copper loot tokens. If you win big you can earn temporary status buffs that can last for hours or even days. But the drawback is that if you lose, you get nothing. It's a bigger gamble than the loot dispensers, but the benefit is that you know exactly what the payout is. The racing machines typically offer movement buffs, Croc continued, the fighter games give melee combat bonuses, and the shooters give advantage on ranged attacks. That sort of thing. It's also theoretically possible to win items out of the claw machine, but I've never heard of anyone actually doing it. It's a waste of time, in my humble opinion. Most of the games are rigged, and they're mostly designed to keep you playing and distracted until something nasty comes along and eats you. I thought you said these places were safe, I said, scanning the arcade for signs of danger. There was nothing that I could see, not even with my spelunker's sixth sense. I said there was an 80% chance it's safe, Croc corrected. But it's always best to keep the first rule in mind, and what is the first rule, Dan? Assume that everything, everywhere, all the time is both lying to you and trying to kill you, I said. Exactly. I don't know for a fact that there's something waiting for us in there. Like I said before, the arcades are technically neutral territory spawned by the researcher, but... Croc faded off. Well, the researcher isn't what he used to be. He can only see so far and do so much. If we're quick, there shouldn't be any issues. Best to avoid the games, hit the dispensers, and get out before we attract anything unfriendly. Good enough for me, I replied. Pulling my hammer from its loop, I headed through the wide archway that led into the arcade with Croc following close behind. The place smelled like an odd mixture of stale bow, moldy carpet, and sickly sweet cotton candy. As I padded down a wide aisle flanked on both sides by arcade cabinets, I found my gaze instinctively being drawn toward the pixelated images flashing across the screen. The effect was eerily hypnotic, and I quickly found myself remembering all of the fun times I'd had playing games at the arcade with my dad. He'd been an old-school Galaga fan, and every week we'd hit up the movie theater and play to see who could go the furthest off a single quarter. I'd never made it past stage 22. My dad, on the other hand, could regularly hit stage 30, which was when King Gala's Spark appeared, launching an all-out invasion against the would-be defender of humanity. I felt something bump against my leg and looked down to find Croc nudging me insistently. "You just stopped working," the dog said. "They all have minor hypnotic properties. Best to get a higher grit level before you risk any coin on those things. The dispensers are just up ahead." The mimic pointed with its snoot. "Let's keep moving." I grunted, feeling a little lightheaded, but heeded the mimic's advice. We left the bulk of the games behind and found a small, partially separated room, devoid of the blazing neon lights painting the rest of the arcade. A regular white, fluorescent light illuminated several machines, which all looked sorely disappointing compared to the video games situated in the arcade proper. There were 2 vending machines, one for various beverages, and another for food items. I examined each and was underwhelmed. They were exactly what they appeared to be. Plain old run-of-the-mill vending machines. I could buy off-label soda, bottles of water, or the kind of garbage food you'd expect to see at a rest stop. Candy bars, bags of chips, zingers, and plastic-wrapped cupcakes. None of it was good or especially nourishing, but if you were dying of starvation or dehydration, a vending machine like this would be a little godsend. Most of the items cost anywhere between 1 and 3 copper Delver tokens. On top of having a rarity system, copper, silver, gold, then gemstone, the tokens also had other designations, like medic, slayer, or elementalist, which were rewarded for completing different types of tasks. The Delver tokens were by far the most common and seemed to be the generic, default reward tokens. Interestingly, it was possible to purchase lesser healing elixirs from the soda machine, but only if you had copper medic tokens to part with. I had several of those, thanks to my near brush with death against the flayed monarch, so I spent 3 of the 5, storing the extra Zima elixirs in my storage space. Despite the protein bars I'd woofed down at the Extreme Supplements store, my stomach was a tight knot of hunger. Apparently walking for endless miles and murdering things for hours on end was hungry work. Mediocre Mark would have all the food I needed, but I didn't want to go into a life-or-death battle while hungry. I was prone to make bad choices when I had low blood sugar. I begrudgingly purchased 2 candy bars, Snackers. Kick hunger in the nuts. For a copper Delver token apiece, scarfing one down and stowing the other for later. The pair of vending machines weren't the only dispensers in the room, however. There was also a boxy red temporary tattoo machine, filled with cheap, Keringy-looking designs that 7-year-olds everywhere thought were the pinnacle of badassery. Grinning skulls and flaming 4-leaf shamrocks, a heart with a knife stuck through it, and a coiled blue and orange cobra ready to strike. There were also several more girly designs, brilliantly colored flowers, elegant butterflies, and a majestic unicorn. The machine had a large coin turner that accepted copper, silver, or gold loot tokens of any variety. "What in the shit is this thing?" I asked, hooking a thumb toward the temporary tattoos. "The temporary buff machine," Croc replied enthusiastically. "This is the alternative to playing arcade games. You put a token in, turn the knob there, and out pops a temporary tattoo. You apply it to your skin and the bonus lasts for as long as the tattoo does. You're guaranteed to get something with the temporary tattoos. The effects genuinely last much longer, especially if you don't shower, but they're always much weaker and you never know what you're gonna get. Unless you use something other than a Delver token. If you put a mythic token in, You're guaranteed to get something related to health rigging or damage reduction. Could be passive resistance as well, the dog added after a second. And what about these things? I asked, crossing the tiny room, then placing a hand against the bank of wide gash-apron machines, which filled the majority of one wall. They looked like fancy toy vending machines that stood chest-high, with bright blue Japanese writing across the sides. Each had a clear case, which displayed a horde of small plastic capsules, all with colorful lids and tiny bubbles contained within. There were 4 different toy dispensers, one for each of the various token rarities: copper, silver, gold, and gemstone. It took 2 copper tokens to earn a prize from the first machine, but only 1 silver, gold, or gemstone token for the others. Curious, I fished 2 more copper tokens from my dwindling supply and fed them into the machine, turning the crank with an audible click and a clack. A mechanism gave way inside the machine and one of the plastic capsules dropped into the vending slot. I retrieved it from a circular hole at the base and held it up, examining the item within. It looked like a tiny, G.I. Joe-sized set of binoculars. I pried the lid off the top and let out a strangled gasp. Screw me left, right, and sideways. The inside of the capsule was a self-contained spatial pocket, 2 feet square in size. I tipped the capsule over, and a set of cheap, but perfectly normal-sized binoculars fell out into my opposite hand. I'd half expected them to be artifacts, but they weren't. Just the kind of thing you could buy on the cheap at a Walmart. Or Walgreens. Yeah, it's a bit disappointing, I know, Croc said, glancing between me and the binoculars. But that's pretty much what coppers will get you. No artifacts, just basic survival equipment. Same rules apply when using specialty tokens. A couple of medic tokens will likely get you band-aids or a tourniquet. You could wind up with a knife if you had some Slayer tokens. Honestly, most of the folks who have survived down here for a while use the coppers as a kind of trade currency more than anything else. But these other ones, the dog fixed his gaze on the next 3 machines in the line, are generally worth the price of admission. Silvers will usually earn you common artifacts with empty effect slots or one-off items. With gold you have a chance of earning uncommon artifacts or sigils. No idea about the gemstone ranks, but I'm sure they're even better. I had 3 silver tokens, Delver, Medic, an Elementalist, 1 gold Ambassador, another gold Weaponsmith, a Diamond Sentinel, and 1 ruby Warlord. I stowed the binoculars, along with a tiny pocket dimension capsule they came in, then popped the gold Weaponsmith token into the 3rd machine and cranked the dial. I pulled out a 2nd capsule, though this one had a plastic gold lid. I opened the container, revealing an even larger interdimensional pocket space. This one was almost 3 feet square. Not that the item inside needed that much room. In the bottom was a smooth red stone, about the size of my palm, with an odd glyph carved into its surface. Bloodletting. Uncommon sigil. Type, weapon sigil. Fact, victims rarely die from stab wounds, they mostly die from the resulting blood loss. Fact, bloodletting will make sure they die so much faster. Bloodletting deals 2 endpoints of additional bleed damage per minute, for 2 minutes where N is equal to the wielder's variant assimilation level. Bloodletting can stack up to 5 times by dealing multiple stab wounds, and each additional instance of bloodletting will refresh the effect's duration. What the hell are you waiting for? Go bananas and get to stabbing. Restriction, must be affixed to a weapon that deals piercing damage. I stared at the bloody stone with what must have been a combination of pure shock and ecstatic joy etched into the lines of my face. Wait, so I could just pop this thing into one of my tools and anything I stabbed with it would just spontaneously bleed out for 2 minutes? Oh hell yeah. There were so many things that I wanted to stab. Obviously, this wouldn't work for my hammer, since stabbing things with a hammer is tough, though, admittedly, not impossible, but it fit my demolition screwdriver like a glove. I slid the bulky screwdriver from its customary pouch and turned it over in one hand. Truly, there was nothing special about it. It had a clear plastic handle engraved with the word Craftsman in blocky white text, and a long heavy metal shank with a flat-tipped head, slightly dulled by years of hard use. There was nothing pretty about it and I'd picked it up from Lowe's for $12, but the most dangerous weapons rarely looked fancy. This thing was the definition of form follows function. This bastard wasn't built for turning screws, it was built for stabbing things, and I was gonna put it to good use. Intuitively, I took the blooded rune and pressed it against the length of metal. The tool heated up, vibrating steadily against my palm, and a prompt appeared. Would you like to add bloodletting to the Craftsman demolition screwdriver, filling one of 2 empty effect slots? Since this is your first time using a sigil, be advised that once a sigil is bound to an artifact it cannot be reclaimed without destroying the artifact. Proceed? Yes, no? Some small portion of my enthusiasm dwindled as I read over the warning. Unlike my spatial core, it seemed I wouldn't be able to swap sigils freely. If I did this, it would be for keeps, no rados if I didn't like the way things turned out. If a new and better sigil came along in the not-too-distant future, would I be pissed about this decision? I only considered the question for another second, before proceeding. Honestly, I couldn't imagine a better fit for the screwdriver, and the effect would even scale as I leveled the skill through use. There was no point sitting on something this awesome. There was a bright flare of white light as the redstone melted into the screwdriver, staining the metal shaft a bloody red color. Research achievement unlocked. Evolved from monkey. Look at you, fashioning and enhancing rudimentary tools to better kill things. This is like that scene out of 2001, A Space Odyssey, except more pathetic somehow. Still, your hairy, primitive, knuckle-dragging ancestors would be proud. And for the record, I'm talking about your Uncle Jed. Reward, 5x Delver Copper Loot Token. I absently dismissed the achievement and examined the screwdriver in closer detail, conjuring its item screen. Sure enough, the first effect slot was now filled by the deliciously gruesome bloodletting ability. I gave the tool-turned weapon a little twirl, then took a couple of practice jabs, enjoying the way it felt in my grip, before finally stowing it back in my tool belt. If it had been gold, what would a ruby token get me? Instead of dicking around with the silver and gold tokens, I pulled out the ruby warlord token. I'd never been one of those patient kids who liked to save the best gift for last on Christmas morning. I always went in for the kill straight away, picking the biggest present under the tree, then tearing the paper away like a feral honey badger raiding a beehive. I plunked the ruby token into the last Gashapon machine in the line and waited with hungry anticipation. The contraption once more gave a mechanical whirl as I turned the dial and another capsule emerged in the prize slot, this one with a metallic ruby-colored lid. Excitedly, I popped the top, revealing a capsule space big enough to store a large dog, and dumped the rather small sigil onto my palm. Unlike the last, this stone was pure, inky black and had a gleaming, bone-white symbol carved into its face. Upon closer inspection, a tag appeared. Gavel of Get Fucked, Fabled Sigil. My eyes skipped past the rather colorful flavor text and landed on the sigil's effect. Activate a power attack, costing 20 stamina, which inflicts additional damage equal to 20% of the opponent's existing health, 250 max damage. If the opponent is already below 10% total health, Gavel of Get Fucked lands a killing blow, instantly slaying the target. Landing a killing blow triggers a follow-up effect, Wave of Justice, that applies the gavel's primary effect to all enemy combatants within a 20-foot radius around the gavel's wielder. Gavel of Get Fucked has a cooldown time of 5 minutes. Restriction, must be affixed to a weapon that deals blunt force damage. I just stared, completely thunderstruck. Holy shit. Not only was it a fabled sigil, but it only had a single restriction. It needed to be bonded with an artifact that was classified as a blunt weapon. But that wasn't much of a restriction at all, considering my hammer was the best weapon I had anyway. True, this would take up one of the 2 effect slots, but I highly doubted I was going to find something better suited for me anytime soon. I pressed the sigil against the blunt metal hammerhead and quickly breezed past the confirmation prompt. As sigil and hammer became one, the handle turned from plain brown hickory to a black so deep it seemed to eat the light. The head practically burned silver against the inky handle. In a word, it was awesome. I slipped the hammer into its customary loop and pulled yet another token out, this time the Diamond Sentinel token. But then I paused. The coin extended halfway toward the vending machine slot. I caught a strange sound, so soft I almost missed it at first. It was like the rustle of dry fall leaves rubbing together. I lowered the token and glanced back over one shoulder at the seemingly empty arcade. "Did you just hear something?" I asked Croc, feeling a thin thread of worry rear its ugly head. "'Cause I could have sworn I heard something." "No, I heard it too." The dog's body was canted away from me as the mimic peered into the strobing neon chaos beyond. "There's something in here with us, all right," Croc confirmed, though it never took its eyes from rows of neatly lined video games. That certainly didn't leave me full of warm and fuzzies. "Care to elaborate?" I asked, then froze as I heard the sound again. Only much, much closer. Chapter 18. It was the whisper of fabric on fabric, this time accompanied by a blur of motion off to my left. I wheeled, catching the fluttering edge of a blue sheet, just before it disappeared behind one of the racing machines. Another flash of movement in the corner of my right eye revealed a small figure, no more than 4 feet tall, who scampered out from behind one of the claw machines. For the first time, I got a good look at our visitor. At first glance, I wasn't particularly impressed or worried. It looked like a kid wearing a bright red sheet draped over its head. The stupid ensemble made him vaguely resemble a ghost. There were jagged holes gouged into the sheet, but I couldn't see any eyes, just pits of black that seemed to go on and on and on. Those black endless sockets were the most disturbing part by far. A pair of gnarled, bare feet protruded from beneath the hem of the loose-fitting sheet, the toes long and pale and capped with yellowing nails that hadn't been trimmed in ages. Dweller 0.393C, Arcade Spectre Level 2. Arcade Spectres look like grubby toddlers pretending to be ghosts for Halloween, and that's about how dangerous they are. Hell, if anything, these little rascals can be mildly beneficial. Their meat is chock full of healing nutrients, assuming you're willing to indulge in what is basically borderline cannibalism. Unfortunately for you, the thing that likes to hunt these guys isn't so harmless. I'd run if I were you. Croc, how boned are we here?" I asked. On a scale of milk bone to prehistoric fossil, I would say we're solidly preserved mammoth tusk. "What the fuck is that supposed to mean?" I shot back, one hand already reaching for my newly enhanced hammer. "It means no need to panic yet, Dan." "But..." The mimic trailed off. "But maybe best to hurry it along, yeah. You can ooh and ah at your goodies once we get out of here." Croc had never sounded worried before, but the dog sounded worried now. Which probably meant I needed to really worry. I spun back to the machines and started feeding my high-end loot tokens into each of the respective Gashapen machines as fast as my fingers would move. 3 silver tokens, a basic Delver token, 1 mythic, an elementalist, 1 gold ambassador token and, of course, the coveted Diamond Sentinel. I didn't even bother to look at the contents of each capsule, but instead shoved all of them into storage without a second look, nervous sweat beading on my forehead and running down my cheeks. There was a thump that rattled the floor off in the distance, followed by a distant sound that was hard to place, but also strangely familiar. It was droning and repetitive. Almost hypnotic. "And now we should panic," Croc called. "Time to go, Dan. Like right now." The sound was growing louder, more insistent. With the capsules all safely stowed, I rushed over to Croc's side and froze when I saw something huge and round emerge from the end of an aisle, not far off. The creature was easily the size of a compact sedan, perfectly spherical, and covered in pebbled yellow flesh. It had 2 beady black eyes, glossy and lifeless like a shark, and a cavernous maw filled with rows and rows of cruel curved teeth. The jaws of a deep-sea anglerfish, maybe. I was staring at an off-brand, horror movie rendition of Pac-Man. Dweller 0.3327A, Mobile Murder Muncher Level 27. Let's not pretend we don't all know exactly what this is. Yep, a mobile murder muncher. The Triple M is a triple threat and is as fierce as it is stupid. A voracious creature of pure, unthinking hunger, The mobile murder muncher yearns for the healing flesh of the arcade specters, which soothes it from the unrelenting pain of its own terrible existence, at least for a short while. With that said, it isn't a particularly picky eater and will consume anything unlucky or stupid enough to get in its way. If there is any saving grace to this shit show of a situation, it's that the Triple M will not leave the arcade for any reason. It's also dumber than a sack of hair. But then so are you for being here in the first place. You really should have run when I told you to. The monster opened and closed its mouth in a rhythmic fashion as it levitated a foot above the star-speckled carpet. Now, I knew exactly what the sound was. Waka waka waka, the creature thundered, before disappearing down the next aceway. Dead ahead one of the arcade specters appeared, this one clad in blue. It took off at a sprint, moving as quickly as possible away from the murder muncher. In Pac-Man the ghosts usually hunted you, but in this Bizarro world, of course it was the other way around. The codex entry said the murder muncher was stupid, but it also said the monster was hungry, and if it was after the creepy ghost kids, I didn't want to be anywhere near them. I turned and took off in the other direction, running toward the glass-fronted entryway, hoping to get clear of this place before the murder muncher could get within chopping range. I took a sharp right and skidded around an aisle filled with more claw machines, these filled with miscellaneous weapons and odd baubles, then bolted past a bank of first-person shooters, which stood near the exit. Except there was one problem. One huge, pain-in-my-ass problem. A metal security gate had been unceremoniously rolled down from the ceiling and secured to the floor with a thick metal lock. I could easily stick one hand through the metal slats of the rolling gate, but there was no way I could squeeze my body through. Picking the lock was out of the question, and I didn't have any artifacts or relics that would let me get past the gate. Theoretically, I could bust the lock with my hammer, but it was outside the metal gate, so getting a clean shot would be impossible. And the most bleach bolt would do is leave the metal sparkling and clean. I had a full charge on the slammer of shielding, but that was a stopgap measure at best. I needed to find a way out. Fast, quick, and in a hurry. I rushed over to the broad glass panel flanking the security gate to the left. I doubted very much that I'd be able to bash my way through, but my hammer did have a few fancy new upgrades, and I had Surveyor's Mark as part of the Catacomba emblem, which allowed me to alter the physical structures of the backrooms in small ways. Admittedly, smashing out an entire window probably didn't qualify as altering things in a small way, but I'd feel dumb as shit if I didn't at least try. I let the mana in my core flow down my arm and into the hammer gripped tightly in my hand. The makeshift weapon felt hollow and hungry, like an empty vessel desperate to be filled. My blue mana gauge flared to life, dropping by several points, then suddenly the weapon swelled, growing to the size of a sledgehammer. It blazed with cold cobalt light, as though it were built entirely from forged mana, but weighed no more than it had before. I planted my feet, grabbed the handle with both hands, then swung for the fences, activating gavel as I did. My stamina plunged as well, dropping close to zero as even more power surged into the weapon. The blunt face slammed into the glass with a thunderous reverberation, and the smallest hairline fracture crept outward from the impact. Seeing the tiny crack made me think that I might well be able to bash my way free. If I had an unlimited pool of mana and stamina and a couple of uninterrupted hours to bang on the glass. But I didn't have either of those. What I did have was a handful of seconds before I was sharp chum. The racket had drawn the attention of the murder muncher, and it was racing toward me at an unbelievable speed. "Oh, fiddlesticks. We need to move, Dan," Croc bellowed, slamming into my hip with one shoulder. I stumbled, frozen for a moment by the sight of the onrushing avalanche of pebbled, waxy skin and two big teeth. The creature was horrifying, but watching its jaws rhythmically shoot up then snap shut was hypnotic. Dreamy. There was a part of me that wanted to stand there, staring placidly into the maw of certain doom like a moron. Thankfully, the jarring shove from Croc broke the strange trance and coaxed my feet into motion. I shook my head and staggered into a run, darting down the connecting aisle. There was a whoosh of displaced air as the murder muncher erupted from the aisle, then turned on a dime and proceeded to follow us. The rumbling growl of Wakla Wakla Waka chased us down the hall, the sound vibrating inside my chest. It was the sound of memories. Of long summer nights and childhood friendships. It was also the sound of my death. The arcade is locked, I hollered down at Croc, who was pacing me easily. The mutt was fast when it wanted to be, and it seemed Croc had a very strong urge not to be eaten. What the hell do we do now? Two options, Croc replied, panting a little even though the mimic didn't have lungs to speak of. There should be an emergency exit that will dump us back into the mall. Could be anywhere, though, so we'll have to stay alive until we can find it. Or we can find a ravenous hunger pellet. It's a white ball, about the size of a fist. Floats in the air. It'll make the murder muncher vulnerable for 3 minutes. And then we can kill it? I asked. Croc barked a laugh. Heavens no. It's level 27. Even vulnerable, it'll shrug off anything we can throw at it. But its teeth will vanish for a bit, so it'll have to gum us to death instead, which it is fully capable of doing, by the way. It's just a much slower death. More painful, in all likelihood. Then why would you tell me about it? I yelled, still running. Except, the words were lost as the Waka 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 behind me grew so loud it was deafening. I could feel hot fetid breath on my back, and I knew that if I turned around, even for a moment, the creature would bite me in two. We blasted out from the end of the aisle, and I saw a red neon exit sign a few rows over. Unfortunately, a pink-sheeted ghost slammed into me at the exact same instant, and the pair of us went down in a tangle of limbs. We rolled several times, and when we finally came to a stop, the ghost was lying on top of me like a lumpy sack of potatoes, and the murder muncher was less than 10 feet away and closing fast, its predatory eyes locked onto our position. Oh fuck. I fumbled for the slammer, but my fingers felt numb and useless. That was the adrenaline settling in. Adrenaline is one hell of a potent drug, but it has a few drawbacks, like diminished hearing, tunnel vision, and the temporary loss of fine motor skills. Which was the reason my fingers were staging a mutiny. But it also has the added benefit of slowing time down to a crawl. Things weren't actually going any slower, of course, but my brain was processing information at a breakneck speed. I knew I wouldn't have the dexterity to use the slammer, but there was one option that might buy me a few extra precious seconds. Just enough time to get to the exit, if I was lucky. If I was unlucky, I was going to die horribly. It wasn't a great option, and I would have trouble looking at myself in the mirror for a few days, but it was that or be devoured by a mutated version of Pac-Man. Given the outcome, the choice was a no-brainer. I pulled my legs up, jammed them into the arcade specter's stomach, and mule-kicked the son of a bitch off of me and straight into the oncoming jaws of the murder muncher. The ghost was surprisingly light, it only weighed as much as a small child, which had a number of disturbing implications. It sailed through the air like a punted football, its little legs kicking as it issued a terrified mewling noise that might have almost sounded like the word help. Or maybe not. I was hoping not. Then the jaws crunched down and there was an explosion of gore. The creature was dead so fast, its health bar didn't even have a chance to appear. A geyser of crimson erupted outward in an arc, spraying the purple carpet and drenching me in blood, bone, and bits of fluttering sheet. It was easily one of the most horrendous things I'd ever seen. I'd kicked the defenseless ghost child into the creature's mouth, knowing it would be devoured. I hadn't been aware I was feeding it into the supernatural equivalent of a wood chipper. Yep, definitely didn't feel good about that. But it was me or the ghost, I reminded myself, and I'd pick me all day every day. The murder muncher had stopped moving and was mashing through the meat in great noisy gurgles. I scrambled to my feet and took off like a bullet, racing around another arcade machine, classic Donkey Kong, beelining for the emergency exit. "You okay?" Croc called, appearing beside me at a run. "Because that is an obscene amount of blood." "It's not my blood," I yelled in reply. "Now move your ass." In the distance, the ominous Waka 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 had started up once more, like the engine of a murderous combine tractor roaring to life. But Croc and I raced through the door and into the relative safety of the mall. I skidded to a stop, sweating, shaking, and bloody, then doubled over, hands pressed against my knees as I sucked in great, greedy lungfuls of air. I stole a sidelong look at the dog. "Hey Croc," I said, "let's not make any more unnecessary pit stops, okay?" "Oh, fiddlesticks. But there's a great froyo place not far from here," Croc replied, looking crestfallen. "Don't know why, but the arcade always puts me in the mood for froyo." I just donkey-kicked a toddler into the equivalent of a sentient bear trap, I growled, looking down at my blood-spattered shirt. "We are not, under any circumstances, getting froyo." Chapter 19. Half an hour later, Croc and I were sitting on a bench in front of a froyo place called Yogurt Oasis. We'd come here because Yogurt Oasis happened to be the closest store with a working bathroom, and not in any way because I begrudgingly wanted to make Croc happy. The shop was tiny and manned by only a single level 2 dweller, called a seasonal work goblin. One bleach bolt cleansed the world of the goblin's existence in less than 2 minutes, leaving behind a burbling corpse and a single common relic shard. I caught sight of all the delicious-looking containers of frozen yogurt as I looted the creature's corpse. I hated myself for admitting it, but froyo did sound amazing. Maybe it was because I'd very nearly died a few minutes before, or maybe it was because I hadn't eaten anything but a candy bar in more than a day. But either way, I couldn't take my eyes off the Sumato coffee blend, which was an unbroken swirl of white and brown frozen goodness. It smelled like caffeine, chocolate, and happiness. But how could I possibly eat something so delicious after literally feeding another living being into an industrial-sized kitchen blender? Just the thought of doing it was immoral, unethical, disgusting. Honestly, I should have been ashamed of myself. I did it anyway. My gut told me that the random monster toddler from the arcade would want me to honor its memory with joy, not sorrow. But before digging in, I made sure to thoroughly scrub off the caked-on blood and wring the gristly chunks of ghost meat out of my undershirt. Just as the ghost child would have wanted. It was a losing battle, unfortunately. My undershirt was so stained with blood that it looked solidly red instead of white. Well, faded pink really, since I'd tried to wash it in the sink. Although it was an artifact with a personal significance, it didn't have any effects yet, and I couldn't stomach the thought of wearing it. Not until I found a way to properly wash it. I stowed it in storage and fished out a loose black t-shirt that read, "Existence is a joke, and we are the punchline." Croc was sitting beside me with a cup of passion mango citrus sorbet. The mimic had sprouted human hands at the end of his forelimbs, but he'd left the rest of its dog body more or less the same. Was it disturbing? Not after what I'd witnessed in the arcade. The lobby greeters had been terrifying, and the bathroom janitor would haunt my nightmares for years to come, but they all dimmed in comparison to the murder muncher and the geyser of blood that had soaked me from head to toe. Everything was a walk in the park compared to that. Croc enjoyed the sorbet in contemplative silence, which was a nice change of pace, while I polished off the rest of my Sumato coffee blend then pulled out the capsules I'd taken from the arcade. I'd suffered extreme psychological trauma and had nearly died to get these damned things. I just hoped it was all worth it. I had 3 silver capsules, 1 gold, and 1 with a sparkling diamond lid. I moved to pop the lid of the diamond capsule, but Croc stopped me. "Wait, you can't do that," it said, sounding personally scandalized. "Why the hell not?" I asked. "This is the best one, so I should start with it first." "That's exactly why you can't start with it first," Croc replied, rolling its eyes. "Trust me, that one is going to be amazing, but then the rest of them will feel underwhelming, even though they're actually great prizes. But if you start with the silvers and work your way up, then the anticipation will build and build. Trust me, it's far more satisfying to do it that way." I grunted non-committally but didn't feel like arguing with the dog. I was going to open them all anyway, so if Croc wanted to save the best for last, I could do that. "Fine," I said, swapping out the diamond capsule for one of the silvers and wriggling the top off with my thumb. I systematically opened the 3 silvers, one right after another. The items weren't world-breaking by any stretch of the imagination, but they were all useful enough in their own way. The Silver Delver capsule rewarded me with an artifact called Twinning String. It resembled a big ball of red yarn, which sounded lame as hell, but was actually kinda badass. The way it worked was both simple and ingenious. First, you cut off a length of yarn, cut that piece in half again, then tied one section around your finger and the other around literally anything else, typically another person or a distant location. The two pieces of yarn were then twinned together, and you could conjure a wispy blue line that connected the first piece of yarn to the second. It was in every conceivable way inferior to my unerring arrow spell, but it would be an invaluable lifeline to anyone else. I didn't have any need for it, but I was sure I could get a hefty premium for the yarn. The Silver Medic capsule yielded a one-time use artifact called the Healing Hand Grenade. Ironically, it didn't look like a hand grenade at all. Instead, it looked like one of those cheap, green water balloons you could get at the supermarket for $1 or $2. The kind that was as thin as tissue paper and would pop if you looked at it in the wrong way. Naturally, it was filled with Zima. But the effect did exactly like what it sounded like. Went back and chucked the balloon into a group of friendlies, instantly healing up to 200 points of damage to all allies in the 30-foot area of effect. I stored that so I wouldn't accidentally pop it. The Silver Elementalist capsule ended up being the best of the lot. It granted me a flat 8% resistance to fire damage, increased burn damage regeneration rate by 12%, and made the item it was attached to fireproof. There was one minor catch, though. It could only be attached to armor classified as pants. Which meant my frayed, ass-hugging jorts. It was annoying, but between that and the gremlin's growing guardian relic, at least I knew the old family jewels would be taken care of. When I opened the gold-leaded capsule, I found a golden medallion, suspended from a gold chain with thick links. On one side was a giant thumbs up. On the back were the words, "Researcher approved." Seal of the researcher. Fabled artifact. Type, one-time use. Well, look at you, Mr. Hotshot. Earning a personal nod from the researcher himself. Not too shabby. You must have done something pretty fucking impressive because he doesn't just go around handing these bad boys out, believe you me. This is a one-and-done item and serves as a personal voucher from the big guy. The researcher holds a lot of sway with certain backrooms factions, and if you present them with this talisman, they'll treat you like a favorite nephew and allow you to operate freely within their territory. It's a lot more impressive than it sounds. Remember, in a world where everyone's gunning for you, it's damn good to have a token telling them to aim elsewhere. As for the last item, it was a sigil stone and ended up being every bit as good as the gavel of Get Fucked, which I'd received from the Ruby Warlord token. Hell, it might have been better. Mana Capacitor. Fabled Sigil. Type, Cloth Armor Sigil. Armor is great. If you're a loser who plans on getting punched in the teeth all the time like a bitch. Which is why you don't want an armor upgrade. Nope, what you really want is a mana upgrade, because no one can punch you in the teeth if you set them on fire with your mind or use a relic to turn them into USDA-certified organic meat paste. Enter Mana Capacitor. Let's call it what it really is, a giant magical battery that will supercharge your abilities. What's not to love? Mana Capacitor increases your total maximum mana pool by 15%, increases your overall mana regeneration rate by 10%, and has a 5% chance to trigger Wild Surge when using any relic that costs mana. Wild Surge instantly replenishes 50% of your total mana pool, increases mana regeneration by 25% for 2 minutes, and has a 50% chance of duplicating the original trigger spell at no additional mana cost. After reading through the description 3 separate times, I decided it was significantly better than the Gavel Sigil. Although Gavel of Get Fucked offered some extraordinary effects, it was limited in scope, could only be used while wielding my hammer during melee combat, and drained stamina to activate. The Mana Capacitor, on the other hand, was a passive that would drastically boost my overall mana pool and regen rate, plus the Wild Surge ability alone was worth its weight in gold. There was one serious drawback, which felt like a kick in the ballsack. Restriction, must be affixed to an item that qualifies as cloth armor. Naturally, I had exactly one artifact item that qualified as cloth armor, And it wasn't my boots, jorts, undershirt, or tool belt. I pulled off the stupid, ugly Versace bathrobe. It was bright red with black cuffs and a black belt, decorated with Baroque golden statues and weird Grecian shit. I didn't have anything else, and this item not only met the requirements but also had personal significance, which meant it would scale with me as I leveled. Of all the items I'd nicked Lipton with, the bathrobe was the one I hated the most. And if I added the monocapacitor, I'd never be rid of the damn thing. It would haunt me for the rest of my time here, which could be forever, so far as I knew. Screw me, I grumbled, pressing the sigil stone against the robe, then confirming the prompt that followed. There was a flash of light as the items melted together and a glowing blue sigil, perfectly mirroring the symbol from the stone, appeared bright and bold on the back of the robe. With a disgruntled sigh, I slung the robe around my shoulders and slid my arms into the sleeves, instantly feeling a tremendous surge of power rush through me like a crackling bolt of electricity. I looked dumb as hell, but fashion didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Only survival. And the monocapacitor would help me survive. You ready? I asked as Croc finished the last drags of sorbet. Because we've already wasted too much time as it is. Croc took one last longing look at the froyo and nodded sadly. Then, because I was both a jackass and a sucker, I easily vaulted over the counter and grabbed each of the stowed tubs of froyo, disappearing them all to my storage system. I still had plenty of room to spare and the space was time-locked, so the froyo would probably last longer than I was going to. For later, I said as Croc visibly brightened. You really are the best friend, Dan, Croc replied. Let's go get you to Walgreens so you can finally get the life-saving medication, which is definitely not hemorrhoid cream, that you so desperately need. Chapter 20. We spent the better part of the next 6 hours putting as much distance as possible between us and the loot arcade, all while maneuvering through mostly empty shopping mall corridors and not quite so empty storefronts. The compass of the catacomber made the trip as quick and painless as possible. Though, to be fair, there was still quite a bit of pain involved. Spelunker's sixth sense helped me avoid more traps than I could count, but there were still runic pressure plates, magical tripwires, and enough mimics to fill an Olympic swimming pool. And those were the easy traps. We stumbled across one hallway shrouded in deep shadow, though the gloom was pierced by thin shafts of light that streamed in through an overhead skylight. Unerring arrow ushered us through the passageway, but it led us along a path that curved and zigzagged, avoiding each of the beams of illumination. Once we cleared the obstacle, I took out the coat from my storage space and tossed it directly into a shaft of white light out of curiosity more than anything else. Razor blades of concentrated sunfire condensed and sliced the jacket into 100 smoldering pieces. It wasn't hard to imagine what would have happened to the oh-so-frail human form. There were cursed mirror chambers that would ensnare anyone with a weak grit score in a world of crystalline glass, stranded until you invariably starved to death or died of thirst. We also discovered 2 temporal distortion pockets, which would suspend unlucky souls inside a bubble of frozen time for 100 years or more. Victims would survive the cruel process only to find everyone they'd ever known was dead and gone. We even found one of the gravity inversion wells near a pastry shop called Cinnaholics. That we stayed well clear of, since I was currently enjoying the use of all my limbs. But seeing all those traps did get me thinking. One of my new abilities, Surveyor's Mark, allowed me to mark my path and even make small superficial changes to the backrooms themselves. I'd learned firsthand that it wasn't powerful enough to do any meaningful structural damage, but what exactly did small superficial changes entail? Back in the lobby, I'd used my Sharpie to leave rudimentary directions for myself, but the corridors had quickly dissolved my handiwork. Now though, with a little will and a trickle of mana, it turned out I could imbue the Sharpie with enough power to leave notes on the walls. Which is exactly what I started doing. Shadow Gauntlet, do not touch the beams of light. Dan. Gravity inversion well, will literally rip all your limbs off. Dan. The gray bench on the right is a mimic. Dan. Cinnaholics is only okay. The pastries are stale. Lots of calories. Dan. The Sharpie wasn't the easiest thing in the world to see from a distance, so Croc and I performed a smash and grab on a craft supply store called the Funky Fresh Art Mart. We were in and out in less than 2 minutes, grabbing as much spray paint as I could get my hands on before the store's artists in residence could drown us in ink or slash our throats with folded origami swords. The spray paint made marking each of the traps all the easier. There were also dwellers to deal with. Lots of dwellers. Even with an unerring arrow to guide us and the map to show us when there were hostile creatures lying in wait, we couldn't avoid them all. Nor did we want to, truth be told. In order to take over the mediocre mart, I needed to get stronger and level up, and to do that, I needed to hunt. Unfortunately, the line between hunter and hunted was often a blurry one. More than once, Croc and I had to haul ass to get away from horrors that were way the hell outside of our respective weight classes, especially when we ventured through the shops themselves. Similar to the dungeons that populated games like those in the immensely popular Titan Realm RPG franchise, most of the shops had lower-level mobs and one significantly more powerful overseer, which on this floor were typically labeled as store managers, though Croc assured me that changed based on the theme of each individual floor. Those store managers carried the best shit, hands down, but were not to be dicked around with unless running away wasn't an option. Still, so long as we didn't get pinned down or backed into a corner, running was almost always an option. The store managers were viciously territorial and would violently eradicate anything inside the bounds of their territory, but once we got outside the confines of their stores, they seemed reluctant to venture out into the mall. And thank sweet baby Jesus we didn't stumble across anything even close to as lethal or powerful as the murder muncher from the arcade. There were plenty of other things that lurked in the common spaces of the mall, however, and the only way to shake those assholes was to kill him outright. We tangled with a couple of the carnivore Rex plants and a lone wandering mall janitor, who bore a striking similarity to the janitorial handyman from the lobby bathroom, though instead of a toilet for a head, it had a mop bucket. The most common mob, by far, were the seething packs of mall rats, which were vicious rodents each the size of a Rottweiler. They were mean as hell and dealt a disease debuff that lasted for 20 minutes if they managed to land a clean bite. Most of them were low-level, but they traveled in groups of 10 or 15. One pack was even accompanied by a level 11 mall rat king, who looked less like a rodent and more like a mangy werewolf with a bald, pink tail. The Rat King had been wearing colorful board shorts and a puka shell necklace, which undermined his authority somewhat. Still, even accounting for the board shorts and the necklace, Croc and I hadn't been able to beat the overseer on our own, so we drew him off to a hallway strewn about with limb ripper snares. Turned out the dwellers were just as susceptible to the traps as anyone else. That might even have explained why so many of the creatures were reluctant to leave behind the safety of their tiny fiefdoms. I ended up with a score of shallow cuts, painful lacerations, a pair of deep puncture wounds on my bicep, courtesy of the jaws of an especially ambitious mall rat, and a broken hand for my trouble. And that was with the mop and the unerring arrow to guide us. But, if there was one good thing about this place, it was that even the most severe wounds healed at sharply accelerated rates. A broken hand should have taken 6 weeks to fully recover from. The pain had faded within the first hour and by the third, it was almost as good as new. I also earned heaps of experience points for all the kills, 2,325 to be exact, which pushed me up to level 9. Croc and I only earned partial experience for the Rat King, since technically the backrooms themselves managed to land the killing blow, but the sheer volume of wandering mole rats had added up to just over 1,500 points. That was enough to push Croc up to level 10, which the mimic dog seemed especially pleased about. Along with the experience came a small fortune of shards, relics, and artifacts. Unfortunately, most of them were absolute garbage, and everything else ended up being duplicates of absolute garbage, which was somehow even worse. There were relics that caused uncontrolled hiccuping and others that caused unpredictable lapses in memory. Even one that resembled a portable Walkman which, when equipped, made the wielder speak entirely in boy band lyrics. That one was the worst by a country mile. There were 2 notable exceptions. The first came from the wandering mall janitor and took the shape of a bright yellow triangular folding sign which had a red stick figure man flanked by the words "Caution wet floor" on top and "Cuidado paso mojado" on the bottom. It was a common relic appropriately named "Slippery when wet," which allowed the user to conjure a thin sheen of extremely slick water that would cover a 10 by 10 section of floor. Not the most devastating spell in my arsenal, and certainly not on par with Bleach Bolt, but I figured it might have a few practical uses. I added that one to my core, bringing my total relic count to 8. The other worthwhile relic came from a level 5 delinquent mall rat, bigger and nastier than the common mall rats, but not quite as deadly or revolting as the mall rat king. It looked like a pair of pitted brass knuckles that had seen better days. The effect was a common physical ability called Sucker Punch, which dealt additional physical and emotional damage when striking an opponent first. What exactly emotional damage entailed, or how it was calculated, I had no idea, but it had a nice ring to it. I would have added Sucker Punch to my spatial core without batting an eye, but it happened to have synergistic resonance with the combo kit I already had equipped. Croc had mentioned that it was possible to combine relics with similar effects, creating more powerful or unique spells and abilities in the process. The problem was that when forging relics, you never actually knew what you were going to end up with. It was all one big crapshoot. In theory, you could wind up with an ability that was rare and badass, but there was an even money chance it would be shitty. And after seeing exactly how shitty some of the relic effects could be, I understood the hesitation. Turned out, I had an ace in the hole. When I pulled the combo kit from my core and held it in close proximity to the brass knuckles, I felt the two items begin to hum and vibrate in my hand like a struck tuning fork a second before a prompt appeared. Synergistic resonance detected. Would you like to forge Sucker Punch, common, level 1, and basic combo kit, camouflage spell, common, level 1, into a new relic? Asterisk. Yes, no? Right below that, like a footnote tacked on at the bottom of a textbook page, was a much smaller line of text. Asterisk run researcher's codex compatibility analysis, yes, no? Finding two relics with a synergistic resonance got my blood pumping, but it was the footnote that left me drooling at the prospects. Maybe forging was less like gambling and a bit more like chemistry, and I happened to have the teacher's study guide stowed away inside my soul. I mentally selected the analysis option, and a new box replaced the first. Researcher's Codex Compatibility Analysis. Based on historic datasets and extensive forging models, Sucker Punch, common, level 1, and combo kit, camouflage spell, common, level 1, have an estimated 92% resonance compatibility, meaning the number of possible relic iterations is low. The most probable outcome is Mall Ninja's Strike, uncommon, or a closely adjacent derivative. Would you like to view additional report records for the Mall Ninja's Strike ability? Yes, no? I selected yes once again and quickly read over a brief and extremely dry analytical report of the potential derivative. The changes were significant, but there was also a certain logic to them. Almost as if the forging process served to amplify the best qualities of each relic, while also making those qualities narrower in focus. First off, Mall Ninja's Strike nerfed the duration of the camouflage spell, cutting it in half from 1 minute to 30 seconds, while also jacking up the overall mana cost by a factor of 10. The payoff was that the camouflage portion of the ability was vastly more effective. Although I wouldn't be invisible, I'd gain an active effect during the duration of the spell called Mall Ninja's Veil, which would allow me to seamlessly blend into surrounding shadows. Mall Ninja's Strike also had a more limited function than Sucker Punch but made up for it by packing a much greater, well, punch. It would allow me to deal 3 times my normal damage, but only if I attacked preemptively while simultaneously shrouded in the Mall Ninja's Veil. The greatest benefit, though, and the bonus effect that made me decide to forge the 2 relics into one, was that the Mall Ninja's Strike damage bonus applied to spells as well as physical attacks. The possibilities for a skill like that were endless. When I finally forged the 2 relics together, there was a tremendous flare of heat accompanied by a blinding, though brief, flash of golden light. When the light vanished, the 2 items were gone and a cheaply manufactured Mall Wakizashi rested in my palm, its handle wrapped in faux silk fabric from several different anime shows. It didn't look like anything special, but then neither did the compass of the catacomber. I examined the new relic description, confirming what the compatibility analysis had already told me. Mall Ninja Strike. Uncommon relic, level 1. Duration, 30 seconds. Cost, 20 mana/10 stamina on strike. Embrace your inner Mall Ninja as you channel the power of shadow to hide from your enemies. And also from all the people who are actively judging you for buying a Mall Wakizashi, you nerd. You couldn't even spring for the full-sized katana? You should be ashamed of yourself. Once activated, Mall Ninja's veil envelops you in an aura of darkness and second-hand cringe, making you seamlessly blend into the surrounding shadows. Your enemies won't see you coming, but they'll certainly feel your presence when you shank them right in the kidney. While they were out partying, you were studying the blade, and it shows. While under the effects of Mall Ninja's veil, your first preemptive strike, whether magical or melee, becomes a devastating surprise attack, dealing 3 times normal damage. Just make sure to exercise caution. You wouldn't want your Klingon Batleth to get caught on your tactical fanny pack and ruin your grand entrance. I grinned in satisfaction. The added ability to predict the likely outcome of the forging process would be a huge benefit once I got the storefront up and running. I'd be able to collect junk relics, then manufacture them into uncommon and rare abilities, which I could sell at a steep markup. Honestly, I was a little sad to lose the versatility of the Sucker Punch ability, but Mall Ninja's strike was the better technique, and it wasn't even close. I also earned another research achievement for forging my first uncommon relic, Easy Bake Oven. The description was as condescending as ever, but it came with 5 copper forger loot tokens, so I didn't give a shit. As for the rest of the relics, I ended up sacrificing 15 of them to bring my Bleach Bolt spell up to level 4, although the process wasn't nearly as quick or easy as forging the 2 relics together had been. Croc guided me through the ritual, which wasn't at all intuitive. I sat on the floor, legs folded beneath me, and arranged 5 relics around me in a rough circle with my body at the center. Each of the objects radiated a strange warmth and a subtle aura of authority and otherworldly power. I meditated on the Bleach Bolt relic, nestled inside my core, then reached out with my will and mind, drawing the generative power of the assembled relics toward me. The objects began to glow with spectral silver light, and after a few seconds, the 5 relics crumbled to find motes of dust, and the colorful essence contained within each of the items flowed toward me, sinking through my chest and into the relic I held in my mind's eye. As the energy settled, the relic level ticked up, moving from 1 to 2. The whole ceremony took about 10 minutes from start to finish and left me weak and shaky, but those feelings passed quickly enough. I repeated the process twice more, laying out the relics each time and funneling their preternatural energy into Bleach Bolt. The spell description remained the same, and so did the mana cost, but the damage output jumped dramatically from 15 points of corrosive damage on contact to 24 points on contact, and it now dealt 5 points of additional corrosive damage per minute for 5 minutes. In short, it was almost twice as destructive as it had been before the upgrade. That left me with 5 unused relics left to my name, 1 extra tinfoil hat of mind shielding, 2 gremlins growing guardians, and 2 basic combo spell relics. All of those I left in storage along with my ever-growing stash of common and uncommon shards. Eventually, I'd forge those into even more relics, but that could wait until later. I also earned a wheelbarrow's worth of artifacts from the various skirmishes, but, by and large, they weren't much better than the relics. Most of them were like the Greater Rage elixir I found in the supplement store. Sort of okay, but offset by a host of horrendous, often crippling, side effects that vastly outweighed any potential benefit. I found a wicked-looking machete that caused you to teleport to a completely random location within line of sight every time you landed a blow against an enemy, in a metal bracelet called Jinxed Fortune, which minutely altered probability against the favor of the wearer. Why would anyone in their right mind want something like that? I wasn't sure. The best artifacts were the ones that tended to have no active effects at all, but rather empty effect slots, just like the barbell I'd looted off the Roid Gremlin Overseer. I picked up a few more lesser healing elixirs. They were all Zima, and 2 Manta elixirs that took the form of the iconic single-quote 90s soda of choice for teens everywhere, Jolt Cola. Those I added to my tool belt so I'd have them on hand for when things went sideways in the worst possible fashion. Worthless garbage or not, the artifacts all went into storage until I could figure out what in the hell to do with them. I was starting to get a little worried about my storage weight capacity. 2,000 pounds sounded like a lot, but little things could add up quick, I knew. When Mediocre Mart finally populated on my map after what felt like countless hours of walking, running, and duking it out against the mall's many inhuman inhabitants, I took a little extra time to track down another progenitor monolith. I was anxious to raid the off-brand Walgreens and claim my first strip of backrooms real estate, but I needed to be smart about it. This was a 2-star threat, I reminded myself, which meant the store manager waiting within was level 10 or above. The mall rat king had been level 10 too, and we'd only managed to kill that dickhead by drawing him into an indiscriminate death trap. I doubted that was going to be an option against whatever called the Mediocre Mart home. The truth was, if I rushed in there with metaphorical guns a-blazing, I'd end up dead long before the monarch ever had a chance to flay the skin from my body. I'd made it to level 9, and the 20 extra personal enhancement points I now had could be the difference between a long, fulfilling life as an interdimensional real estate tycoon and a bloody death that left me in a shallow, unmarked grave just like all the other delvers Croc had tried to help over the years. But I was chomping at the bit to get my ass moving, so I didn't dwell on things over long. I still wasn't entirely sure what blight was, but it sounded like I wanted to catch it about as much as a case of super gonorrhea, so I added 2 more points to preservation just to be on the safe side. Bleach Bolt was still my single greatest weapon, so the more of those I could cast in quick succession, the better off I'd be. Working under that assumption, Resonance got 7 extra points while Perception ended up with 3, significantly raising my mana. 3 points went into Athleticism and the last 2 went to Toughness, which boosted my total health up to 40 and my stamina to 24. Dan Woodridge. Specimen Biotag ID number 038-01-B00R7T569C. Variant Assimilation Level, 9. Race, Human, Archetypal. Current Experience, 7,630. Next Level, 8,250. Personal Enhancement Points, 0. ____________. Health, 40. Health Regen Hour, 1.75. ____________. Stamina Reserve, 24. Stamina Regen Minute, 1.85. ___________. Manta Pool, 58. Manta Regen Minute, 4.5. Individual Adaptive Stats. Grit, 6, 5 plus 1 Enhanced Athleticism, 8. Toughness, 8. Perception, 13. Resonance, 22. Preservation, 5. Spatial Core, Active. C. Tinfoil Hat of Mind Shielding, Level 1. C. The Gremlin's Growing Guardian, Level 1. C. Force Multiplier, Level 1. C. Slippery When Wet, Level 1. U. Mall Ninja's Strike, Level 1. U. Psychedelic Light Show of Minor Distraction, Level 1. U. Bleach Bolt, the Unidentified Stain Eradicator, Level 4. Me. Compass of the Catacomber Fully Tempered. Current Titles, Passive. Out of Your League, Death Wish, Marked for Death, Weapon of Opportunity, Legend in the Making. The physical changes took effect within minutes. It was a genuinely unnerving experience. My skin crawled as the muscles beneath flexed and swelled. Fat melted away from my midsection like water evaporating from the surface of a hot pan. Raw strength surged through my limbs, and it felt like someone had stripped years off my joints and lower back. Right hand to the good Lord, it was the closest thing to a miracle I've ever experienced. A host of old aches and lingering injuries, which I'd collected through a life of hard living and manual labor, vanished in the blink of an eye. I'd grown so used to all those chronic pains that I hardly even noticed them anymore, but the sudden and immediate relief was almost enough to make me cry. Instead of crying, though, I laughed. In the back of my head, I'd been starting to think that someone up above must have hated me something fierce to sentence me to this hellhole, but maybe I'd been all wrong about this place. Were the back rooms deadly? Sure as shit. Were they horrifying? Without a doubt. Could they kill you in a second if you weren't careful? Does a bear shit in the woods? But the back rooms might also have been the best thing to ever happen to me. Feeling like I was 20 years old again and in the best shape of my life, I turned away from the monolith and headed toward the mediocre mart with my hammer in hand, spoiling for a good old-fashioned ass-kicking. Chapter 21. I say this in love and with absolutely no disrespect, Dan, Croc whispered as we stood outside the sliding glass doors that led into the mediocre mart, but this is not quite as glamorous as you made it sound. Through the glass it was easy to see the rows of ruler-straight aisles that stretched out of sight, all loaded down with a bizarre mishmash of off-brand products. The walls were painted a faded salmon color, and they seemed to pulsate with an uneasy internal glow. The glaring fluorescence overhead added to the eerie effect, bouncing off the white linoleum floors and casting a sickly pallor over the entire space. The cash registers near the front stood empty and there was no sign of whatever horrors called the store home, but this place gave me an uneasy feeling. I mean, everything about the back rooms gave me an uneasy feeling, but this was different somehow, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I mean, you're a human, Croc continued, goggly eyes squinted as the dog studied the space. So far be it from me to tell you what to enjoy, but I find it extremely hard to believe this place could possibly rival a water park. For the record, I replied absently, I never said this was better than a water park, it's more practical than a water park. Those are two very different things. I faltered and grimaced. But there's also something wrong with it, I added after a few seconds. I felt like my spelunker's sixth sense should have been screaming a warning at me, but it was oddly silent. That's probably the blight, Croc said solemnly. I told you, it's an infection. Comes from one of the floors far, far below. I frowned, thinking. Maybe we should pick a different location, I finally said after a minute. I'm not afraid, but I'm also not sure I want to spend my limited resources on a location that's infected with magical herpes. Seems like a bad investment. You don't have to worry about that, Croc said dismissively. The blight can spill over into individual locations, but the dwellers are the disease carriers. If we wipe them out, the store will heal itself in no time at all. Plus, we'll get loads of extra benefits from the researcher. It's a win-win if you ask me. Which you didn't. But I'm very helpful, which is why you should have asked me. Despite Croc's reassurances, I hesitated. Is there any risk that you'll catch the blight if we go in here? Oh. Croc looked at me with tears welling in its eyes. You really do care about me. No one has ever asked about my well-being before. Usually, it's get away from me, you hideous freak, or I'll set you on fire. Or can I use you as a meat shield? Or why don't you step on the pressure plate and see what happens? But no one has ever asked if I would be okay. Well, we're friends, aren't we? I replied, shifting uncomfortably. Yeah we are, Croc agreed heartily and happily. What about me? Is there any way I'll catch it? I asked. Because earning some extra experience and loot is awesome, but it ain't worth it if I'm gonna have to chop off my hand because it gets infected with backrooms rabies. I mean, the blight is a disease, the mimic dog said almost apologetically, so of course it's possible to contract it, but it's pretty unlikely. I've seen loads of delvers die, most of them in ways so horrific that it haunts the very recesses of my mind, but I've never lost one to the blight. Instead of thinking about the blight like a plague, maybe think about it like cancer. There are floors that are overrun with these self-aware tumors. Even spending a few minutes in those places can be deadly. But this high up, where the cancer hasn't had a chance to metastasize, we'd have to be exposed for days or even weeks before seeing any signs of blight infection. That made me feel better, but only a little. I was glad to hear that the blight wasn't super gonorrhea, but super cancer wasn't much more comforting. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. "All right," I finally said, enchanted hammer in one hand, my demolition screwdriver in the other. I had a healing elixir and a mana elixir ready to go and the slammer of shielding in my pocket in case things went south. I was never gonna be more ready than this. Stay close. Stay quiet. Let's see if we can get the jump on whatever's inside. I padded forward and the doors slid open with a soft whoosh, followed by an automated chime that rang through the store, instantly alerting anything lurking within to our presence. So much for the stealthy approach. Immediately, I caught a rustle of fabric and a flash of movement down one of the aisles, but when I turned to get a proper look, the dweller was already gone. As Croc crossed the threshold behind me, the glass doors slid shut again and my sixth sense screamed a warning at me. "Get down!" I bellowed, throwing myself flat against the linoleum floor as something sliced through where I'd been standing a moment before. Croc followed suit, moving just a split second behind me. I glanced up over one shoulder and saw a gleaming saw blade protruding from the wall behind the checkout counter. The disc, as big as a truck tire, still quivered and vibrated. I scrambled to my knees, searching for the source of the blade, but didn't see anything. I was sure it was a trap and not an attack, otherwise my spelunker's sixth sense wouldn't have given me a heads up at all. I'd tested the dart extensively during our grind through the mall, and it seemed that the preternatural sense, as glorious as it was, had a few hard and fast limitations. Given the sheer variety of skills and abilities I'd seen so far, I had no doubt that a skill similar to Spelunker's sixth sense, but designed specifically for battle, probably existed. The two skills might even have a certain degree of synergy, though combining them would be impossible, given that my ability had already been fully tempered, meaning it could be advanced no further. Dismissing the thought, I pulled myself from the floor and looked toward Croc. "You okay?" I asked. "Never felt better," the mimic replied cheerfully. I glanced at the floor, finding that hard to believe. The blade had sheared cleanly through its rubber tail. Golden ichor leaked from the stump and the tail quickly reverted to pale blue flesh. I cocked an eyebrow and pointed at the missing limb. "No worries, it's just a flesh wound," the dog said, shrugging rubbery shoulders. Without missing a beat, Croc turned around and huge fleshy tentacles exploded from its maw, quickly consuming the missing piece of meat. Before long, the tail sprouted from the bloody stump and no sign of injury remained. Gross, but I couldn't argue with the results. "Keep close," I said, deciding not to comment on the disturbing display of self-cannibalism. If there was one trap, there's bound to be others. Turning away from Croc, I scanned the area behind the checkout counters on the left, making sure there was nothing lying in wait. I didn't want something coming at me from behind if it could be helped. The space was clear, but for some reason that only ratcheted up the tension building inside my chest. Everything about the back rooms was disturbing, but something about this place in particular got under my skin, sending jolts of fear and uncertainty creeping through my mind. I tried, unsuccessfully, to shake the feeling off as I headed deeper into the store. Instead of picking any individual aisle at random, I moved across the front of the store, staring down each aisle in turn, assessing the situation and searching for any obvious threats. As I got further and further away from the doors, the lights overhead began to flicker and strobe, as though angry about our intrusion, and a low, inhuman moan sounded over the internal PA system. Undercutting the moan was the rough growl of static and the labored, wet sound of heavy breathing. Then the Pennsylvania cut off with a clatter, banishing the sound, though that was cold comfort. I finally made it to the photo development counter. It sat in the corner next to the rows of refrigerated coolers, which took up the wall furthest from the entry. The interior fridge lights sporadically flashed on and off, but it was the deep pool of inky darkness behind the photo counter that left my skin crawling. That darkness seemed to stretch on forever, and though I couldn't see anyone, my gut told me there was something in there, watching us. Or maybe it was the photos hanging above the counters that set my teeth on edge. A variety of framed pictures showcased happy, smiling families. except someone had methodically gone through and gouged out the eyes of every single person in each one of the photos. Something clicked deep within the gloom, and the sound of a movie reel kicked up as a rectangular cube of light bloomed within the dark. It was a movie screen, and I figured the click had been someone turning on one of those old-timey home movie reels, the kind they might have had back in the late '70s or early '80s. I watched, entranced, as the grainy movie played out in a family of four, a husband and wife along with their 2 children, enthusiastically ripped open a pile of presents gathered around the base of a brightly lit Christmas tree. There was no sound to the movie, other than the steady flick of the movie reel itself, but if I strained my ears, I could almost hear distant laughter and the sound of tearing wrapping paper. A gentle numbness crept through my body as I watched, swaying slightly on my feet, but I couldn't seem to muster the will to care. I felt sleepy, happy, warm. Like it was me sitting cross-legged by the tree, soaking up the heat emanating from the fireplace. In fact, I could feel that heat against my back, so comforting and inviting. On the screen, the reel skipped, and for a second the images changed, but I couldn't quite make out what had happened. But it didn't matter. The movie quickly resumed, and now the kids were ripping at the presents with an almost inhuman fervor. Bright red pieces of paper sprayed up into the air and the parents laughed wildly, but there was a manic look in their eyes and it seemed more and more like they weren't laughing but screaming. Still, I watched, unmoving. The heat from the fire and the icy numbness of detachment warred for superiority inside my body. I heard a clatter that might have been broken glass, but the sound seemed distant and unimportant. The blaring sound of the silent movie filled my head completely. The frantic, desperate, ravenous tearing thundered in my ears like a beating heart, but it didn't sound like paper ripping. The noise had morphed, and now it sounded wet and meaty somehow. The image flickered out of focus again, and pale white static momentarily took its place. Those ghostly flashes of black and white drew me in, deeper and deeper. Without a thought in my head, I found my feet shuffling forward, toward the photo counter. The movie reappeared as I slipped past the swinging gate and behind the service counter. Except now the movie was no longer a projected rectangle of light at all. I was inside the living room. I could see the tree, the fireplace, the people. It was so real, I felt like I could walk right up and join them. A sleepy smile spread across my face, until I turned my eyes back to the little boy, frantically shredding his presents. The red-wrapped package was gone and the little boy had changed in the space of seconds. He had deathly pale skin, faded black hair, and long spuddery fingers that ripped through the guts of his screaming sister. The bits of wrapping paper fluttering up were actually thick droplets of blood and pieces of creamy skin. The ripping stopped abruptly, and the boy's eyes shot up, locking onto me as a thin grin stretched across his narrow face. Something clicked inside my head and a notification fluttered in the air above the boy. Dweller 0.375b, photophage blighted, level 7. Prepare to have your grit tested cause these monstrosities have a taste for the stupid and weak-willed. For your information, if you're seeing this, that probably means you. The photophage is a grotesque abomination spawned from the crushing loneliness of human memories. They take up residence in those treasured family photos and old home movies, turning your nostalgic mementos into a twisted nightmare game. One minute you're reminiscing, and the next you're paralyzed in terror as a long-legged horror descends on you like an avalanche of tearing teeth and shredding claws. Maybe this is a metaphor for why it's important to live in the present. Or maybe it's just literally a bloodthirsty monster that is going to rip your face off. Either way, you're fucked. With lightning-fast speed and freakish dexterity, the photophage disembowels its paralyzed victims, reveling in sadistic glee as it crunches through bones and feasts on fleshy morsels. Although not particularly strong, photophages have a host of illusionary tricks and psychic attacks capable of deceiving your senses and distorting the world around you. If you get snared in their hypnotic spell, pray for a quick death, but know that you probably won't get one. These things really like to draw it out. Revulsion and horror washed through me as the prompt disappeared. Thanks to Researcher's Codex, I now knew what I was up against and how to stop it. But it didn't really matter because, Try as I might, I couldn't break through whatever hypnotic spell had been cast over me. The boy, who now had impossibly long arms and legs, left his dying sister and slowly advanced on me. I tried to cast Bleach Bolt, but the numbness invading my body kept my arm firmly at my side. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. I was going to die, I realized, like a punch to the stomach. Then something painful latched onto my calf like the jagged, iron teeth of a bear trap snapping closed. Pain, sharp and clear, flooded through me, and I blinked several times, as though waking up from a particularly terrible dream. I shook my head and glanced down. A tubular tentacle was attached to my leg, sawing through the thick denim of my pants. The tube protruded from Croc's canine mouth. When the mimic saw that I'd finally come to my senses, the tentacle withdrew, revealing a circular mouth that reminded me of a lamprey. Sound crashed over me next. Screams echoed in the air, accompanied by the crackle of flames as one section of shelving burned like a bonfire. My bathrobe was singed and one of the sleeves was charred, as though it had been on fire not long before. Was that the heat I'd been feeling? Had some asshole set me on fire? Psychic attack. Croc growled, spinning away from me to deal with some other, unseen threat. The store had gone completely dark, except for the light cast by the blaze. There were flashes of movement in the shadows beyond the furthest edge of the flames. Dwellers. Lots of them from the look of things, though I couldn't get a clear look at what we were up against. But I didn't have time to deal with that. The pale-skinned boy with the ghoulishly long limbs from the movie was almost on top of me. His dark hair hung limply across a gaunt skull-like head, and his lower jaw had unhinged, revealing a fang-filled mouth large enough to devour my entire upper body. The kid let out an undulating screech and leapt at me, clawed fingers ready to tear out my throat. Chapter 22. I briefly considered pulling the slammer of shielding out of my pocket and hurling it at the floor, but I knew the spell wouldn't activate before the thing was already inside the dome's radius. Instead, I thrust my hammer forward and triggered Bleach Bolt. Mana rushed from my core and exploded outward from the blunt hammerhead as though it were a magic wand instead of a contractor's work tool. The burning ball of blue magic hit the creature directly in the chest, splattering across its ribs and shoulders. The corrosive power immediately went to work, heating holes through the photophage's thin skin. A stat plate appeared, showing the monster's health and mana. HP 28/34, MP 42/65. My Bleach Bolt attack was more powerful than ever, yet the photophage's bright red health bar had barely dipped. Clearly, this thing had some sort of mana or magical resistance. Instead of unleashing another seething ball of corrosive magic, I aimed my hammer at the floor and activated Slippery when wet, which cost me another 5 mana. A thin, glimmering sheen of water abruptly stretched across the already slick linoleum floor, separating me from the photophage. The creature's foot came down on the surface and its ghastly black eyes widened comically as it lost its balance and careened toward me, arms windmilling wildly as it tried to find purchase. As the gangly Shathad careened toward me, I channeled a thread of raw mana into my hammer and it swelled in size, burning with ethereal cobalt light. Before the monster could gain its balance, I swung the hammer in a wicked arc and triggered Force Multiplier at the last second. The hammerhead, now easily twice the size of my fist, collided with the incoming photophage with a sickening, bone-crunching thud. My stamina dropped by half, but it was worth it. The blow caved the skeletal kid's head in like an overripe melon and it dropped to the floor, though the sheer momentum of my swing sent the monster's body skidding backward across the water-slick floor. The nasty little SOP wouldn't be getting up ever again. Its health bar had zeroed out, but I stared at it for a few seconds longer anyway. Just to be sure. Once I was certain it was dead, I cut off the slow but steady trickle of mana to my hammer and turned toward the rest of the darkened store. For killing the photophage, I earned 375 experience and a new achievement, Hammer Time, which came with 3 copper Delver loot tokens and a single silver Weapon Master loot token. I didn't bother to read over the achievement description, I had better shit to do. Like trying to figure out how to not die. More fires raged. In the dancing orange light, I caught sight of Croc doing battle against a squat figure with gray skin, clad in the tattered white lab cloak. Dweller 0.395B, Pharmacy Tech. Blighted, Level 5. The creature had the molted head of a raven, though its beady black eyes were protected behind a set of clear plastic safety goggles. Strange growths, like gnarled, pulsing tumors, protruded from its arms and legs, and another jutted up from its back. It wore a glove on one hand with scalpel blades jutting out from the tips of each finger like a surgical version of Freddy Krueger. In the other hand, it carried what looked like a Molotov cocktail, except it was made from a glass Erlenmeyer flask. A short description popped up above the hunched creature, who had a clear penchant for pyromania. Overworked, underpaid, and sorely unappreciated, pharmacy techs are only one bad customer interaction away from burning the whole world down. On top of everything else, the excruciating, cancerous blight growths riddling their bodies probably don't help curb their latent homicidal rage. Wielding scalpels, used syringes, and science-based firebombs, underestimate these insane fuckers at your own risk and just pray you don't run across their boss. If there were more of these things skulking around in the aisles, that would certainly explain the sudden outbreak of fires. The tech slashed at Croc with its scalped fingers, slicing through thick folds of blue rubber. Golden ichor splashed across the white floor. "Hey, buddy, that wasn't very nice at all," Croc said, sounding only a little perturbed. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to turn your insides into your outsides." The mimic dog reared back onto two legs and swelled in size until it stood as large as a brown bear. Then, Croc's belly split open from throat to crotch, revealing an enormous, fanged mouth with several lashing tentacle tongues within. Those tentacles struck like angry vipers, latching onto the tech, wrapping around its arms, legs, and throat. The Dweller struggled fruitlessly against the mimic, but it was only a level 5 and Croc far outclassed it. With a heave, the tentacles reeled the tech into the gaping stomach mouth. Croc's torso jaws snapped closed with a meaty crunch and a spurt of rancid black blood. The streak of black gore across the floor was all that remained of the tech. Croc dropped to all fours, shrinking back to the size of a lab, and rounded on me. There was a mixture of fear and despair in its goggly eyes. "Dan, I am so sorry you had to see me like that." Croc's voice was reproachful, sorrowful even, as though the dog had somehow betrayed my deepest trust. "I hope we can still be friends and that you don't think any less of me. I swear, I'm a good boy, Dan. A very good boy. Remember, F is for friend." I was quiet for a beat, and the crackling snap and pop from the fire seemed deafening. "Are you kidding me?" I replied, completely deadpan. Croc wilted even more as though I'd just kicked him in the ribs. "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen in my whole fucking life." I crowed. "I mean, was it horrifying?" "Sure. But you're on my team. If anything, I respect and value you even more than I did before." Croc looked up hopefully. "You mean it? You're not mad at me? You're not going to abandon me like Jackson did? Or Angela before him? Abandon you?" I scoffed. "Are you high? Of course I'm not going to abandon you. Honestly, I'm kinda pissed you waited so long to do whatever in the hell that was." I waved a hand toward the aisles. "Go do it more. Just be careful, and if you get in a tight spot, call for help." Croc brightened visibly. "Yay!" Croc cheered. "Let's go crush our enemies and consume their corpses in preparation for our own dark ascension." "Yeah, something like that." I watched as Croc took to two legs once again, this time looking far less like a dog and more like a grizzly bear wearing a venom suit. The mimic stormed down a seasonal aisle filled with squirt guns, swimming trunks, and pool supplies, each step shaking items from the shelves as the monster passed. I just shook my head and moved in another direction. I'd half expected the photophage to be the store manager, but killing the creature had been too easy, and it had only been at level 7. I was looking for something level 10 or above, and after reading over the brief codex description for the pharmacy tech, I had a sneaking suspicion that I was looking for their direct supervisor. I ran down a few aisles until I spotted what I was looking for all the way in the back of the store, tucked away in a corner. The pharmacy. That's where we needed to go. I reached inward toward my spatial core and triggered one of my other new abilities, Mall Ninja Strike. My mana dropped, but I'd already regained some of my power from my earlier scuffle with the photophage thanks to my increased mana regeneration rate. Darkness lay thick around me and there were shadows everywhere, so there really was no better place to try out this technique. Fingers of inky gloom reached for me, and power rushed out from my body. As tendrils of shade spooled around my body, the color faded from my clothes and my skin, until I was little more than a dark, hazy blur. I wasn't invisible, but rather I looked like a living, moving shadow in the shape of a man. A secondary aura hung around me like a cloak, helping to mask my presence from those with a low perception score. Covered by the pervasive Mall Ninja's veil, I stole along the snack food aisle, moving silently as I scanned for more enemy techs or any traps that might be waiting for any unsuspecting delvers. It didn't take long before I found both. There were runic pressure plates scattered all over the place at random intervals, and though I wasn't sure what they did, I knew it couldn't be anything good. There were also a variety of invisible tripwire sigils strung across each aisle at various heights, some at chest level, others low enough to catch an ankle. They weren't traditional tripwires, made from metal or string, but rather invisible cords of shadow magic that ran between two connected sigil sensors. When the signal was broken, the trap would activate. I pulled a teddy bear from a nearby shelf and tossed it across the beam. A silver light flashed, cleanly slicing the bear in half. White stuffing spilled out onto the floor as the two halves landed. That was answer enough. Thankfully, the traps were easy enough to avoid, since they glowed a dull red in my vision, passively alerting me to their presence. I sidestepped or ducked beneath them, though I was worried that Croc wouldn't have as much luck. The mimic dog was made of stern stuff, however, so I had confidence that he'd make it through in one piece. And if not, I was positive that he'd just be able to gobble up any pieces he lost and be good as new in no time. Getting past the disgruntled pharmacy techs wasn't quite so easy. I was guessing there were only about 7 or 8 of them in total, but they moved fast and tended to lob their deadly firebombs from a distance then scamper away. Croc was doing an admirable job of drawing their attention, but even with my shadowy veil in place and the distraction of a giant blue dog bear thing with an enormous mouth splitting its torso, their perception was unfortunately high. Too high to simply sneak past them. I tried that once and ended up with a trio of scalpel razors to the calf. Once I finished clearing this place out, I fully intended to find some better gear. Maybe a suit of medieval plate armor or, barring that, police riot gear. I could wear my personal effects beneath. Honestly, at this point, I'd settle for hockey pads. Tope continued.